Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever this might find you. As you can see, my name is CJ Tremblay. I have the privilege of being the MC for this morning's session. I've been working in international education from student recruitment to English language testing for the past 7 years. And as of a few months ago, really early on in CANI, I became a proud CANI member. And so I'm so happy to be here with you today. I'm so glad you were able to join and commit the time to being part of this discussion. There are more than 300 people registered for this morning's session. We had, so the Americas session, we had the Australian New Zealand session yesterday evening, which went really well, and I'm keen to talk a little bit more about. You know, these are virtual times, and so even though we are meeting virtually, our participants are from all over the Americas, Europe, and our founders who are with us this morning are from the UK, from Australia and New Zealand. So really kind of from all over the place. So, you know, while I myself am located in Vancouver, British Columbia in Canada, the Americas team who helped put on this event and the summit today is really anchored in California, in San Diego, actually. And so wherever you are coming from and joining us from, we do want to pay our respects to the traditional owners of the lands where we're learning today. And so I do want to take this opportunity to welcome to the screen someone who will provide us a traditional land acknowledgement from our sort of home base in the Americas in San Diego.
Hauka, Noshkana Unachihi. I'm the tribal liaison of San Diego State University, and I'm now going to read the Kumeyaay land acknowledgement. We stand upon a land that carries the footsteps of millennia of Kumeyaay people. They are a people whose traditional lifeways intertwine with a worldview of earth and sky. In a community of living beings, this land is part of a relationship that has nourished, healed, protected, and embraced the Kumeyaay people to the present day. It is part of a worldview founded in the harmony of the cycles of the sky and the balance and the forces of life. For the Kumeyaay, red and black represent the balance of those forces that provide for harmony within our bodies, as well as the world around us. As students, faculty, staff, and alumni of San Diego State University, we acknowledge this legacy from the Kumeyaay. We promote this balance in life as we pursue our goals of knowledge and understanding. We find inspiration in the Kumeyaay spirit to open our minds and hearts. It is a legacy of the red and black. It is the land of the Kumeyaay. Hiachan, my heart is good. Nyomu, Nepachis.
So thank you so much for that. This is such an important part of what we're moving toward and the connection between the climate action and the climate emergency and reconciliation. Now, speaking of San Diego, I did also want to welcome Eddie West, who is going to be joining us. He's our master moderator, and he'll be facilitating a number of our panels today. So you'll see the two of us on screen. So Eddie, thank you so much. It's so wonderful. We've been working together for a while now on this event.
You rock, CJ.
So I'm super keen to move through a few of our housekeeping items. Listen, when this started, we were all expecting a virtual event anyway. So when we started planning this, it was always going to be a virtual event. What is, you know, a silver lining in the health and economic crisis that we're facing now is that we're all pretty much Zoom experts. So in terms of interactions, this is a virtual summit, so we have a chat function. We encourage you to use the Q&A. We've designed the program so that it is short and snappy, and that you are engaged as much as possible. So please, we'll be using polls. We encourage you to participate. We'll be using, there are Q&A functions to ask questions to our panelists. Eddie will be moderating that along with the rest of our moderators behind the scene. If you have any issues hearing the audio or seeing any of the slides, please use the chat to let us know. We've got some people there ready to help. And if you get disconnected, which happens, we certainly, it's nothing to worry about. You can just use the same link that you joined with. Now, because this is an event, if we were, it's a virtual summit, and we do want to encourage discussion. The whole point of the summit is to get discussion started. So with that, we are going to be available on Twitter, and there is a discussion forum on LinkedIn. We want to continue this conversation beyond these 3 hours. So some of the conversation started in the Australian Summit, and we encourage you to join in and start really having a powerful conversation. Now, we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for all the support. The Climate Reality Project in Australia and Pacific really kicked us off. So we've got, our sponsors there are super important. And so thank you to all of our partners. And it's just been a real team effort. And there's so many people who participated who aren't here. And so we just wanted to take a quick second to acknowledge really how much has gone on behind this. And so I think with that, I'm going to just take a second. That was sort of a sneak peek at the team, but I did want to introduce you to one of the co-founders who was the host of last night's summit, Ailsa Lamont. So please welcome her to the screen, and we're super keen to hear from her. Thank you.
Hello. My name is Ailsa Lamont, and along with Pitulia Nikula in New Zealand, I'm one of the co-founders of CANI, the Climate Action Network for International Educators. We set up CANI late last year because we saw the growing appetite for change within our sector, and we recognised that there was an opportunity and a need for some kind of forum to bring people together and to ignite the debate and the discussion about what we can do to balance the competing demands of internationalisation and a more sustainable approach to our operations. So with this event today, and we hope perhaps with future events, we are offering up a possible framework for climate action in international education. One where the first step is to acknowledge that we are part of the problem and that our business operating models and our reliance on flying actually contribute substantially to greenhouse gas emissions. And we need to look for ways to minimise or eliminate those wherever possible. Secondly, we recognise that we actually have extensive reach. We have a global network of people that we are in touch with, be that institutional partners or recruitment agents, and that we can actually influence the way that they perceive this, this incredibly important topic. And of course, we can be advocates for change within our own institutions and workplaces. We can't forget students, of course, so you will be hearing from the student perspective today. And we recognise that actually climate action can be a core part of the study abroad experience. In fact, it can be flipped so that the carbon cost of studying abroad can be seen as a teachable moment to help develop skills that international students and globally mobile students actually need. So we don't profess to have all the answers, but what we hope that today will do is create a platform for some of those questions to start being asked, and hopefully to empower and inspire you to take more action within your own organisations. We know that international education is a powerful force and it can be transformative in people's lives. We don't want to take that opportunity away from people, but we do want to find ways to do it in a much more environmentally sustainable way. We also recognise that we, as professionals working in this field, actually have the power to make change ourselves. we, like those globally mobile students, have these incredible, I've had these opportunities, and we have a strong global network of connections. And unlike the students, we often have budgets to go with those connections so that we can actually start to really make a difference. So I'm excited to hear from the incredible range of speakers in our field that we have today. And I hope that this will not be the end of the conversation. So please join us, and we look forward to a great event. Thanks very much.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Ilse. You can really sense her passion. And with that, to set the scene, I do want to just kick off our first keynote. So you might have come across his op-eds about the intersection of climate change and higher education. So please welcome the director of the Center for International Higher Education, Professor Hans de Wit. Oh,
it's really, yeah. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much for inviting me. I think COIL is a really important network for the field of international education to bring us conscious about our own role to what we bring with, to the world on the positive side, but also on the negative side of the impact it has on climate. When I was asked to give this keynote, I was wondering why, because to be quite honest, over the past 40 years, with the exception of the past 2.5 months, I have been traveling around the world at least once, if not more than 3 times a month. And so I'm not really an excellent example of how we can stop climate pollution. On the other hand, I have been always a strong advocate of the second component of international education, which is internationalization at home. And I also, in the past, have been a strong supporter of the collaborative online international learning actions developed by the people in SUNY system in New York to make virtual exchange, virtual interaction possible as an alternative for physical mobility. So in that sense, I feel really very much connected with the issues and the agenda that the COIL network is proposing. To be real, the reality is when we talk about international education or internationalization of higher education, then the fact is that most people still feel that it is related to mobility. Mobility of students and faculty and programs and campuses, but most for all, mobility of students, either for a full degree, the international degree mobility, or as part of your home degree, the study abroad exchange programs that exist. In particular, the international student recruitment dimension has been growing over the past 30, 40 years substantively, has every decade doubled, and we are now over 5 million students that are studying in another country than their own. And the prognosis before COVID-19 were that this would be increasing to at least 8 million in the next decade to come. Also, study abroad as part of home degree by the support in Europe to the Erasmus program has been increasing, and in the United States as well. It has been less dominant in other parts and other countries of the world, but still together, these movements of students make also an enormous impact on the mobility numbers that we see around the world. And increasingly, those studies abroad experience for your home degree are shorter, and so the frequency even has a higher impact on climate than in the past, where most of the mobility was much more a semester of a full year. So we cannot ignore that our field of international education contributes substantially to the pollution of our planet. And so it is very important to see how can we change that. And it is a fact that the movement for internationalization at home, internationalization of the curriculum, was something that already 20 years ago started in Europe with the internationalization at home movement, saying, what about the 95% of the students that are not mobile? Should we not focus much more on those students when we talk about internationalization of higher education, and we talk about how they can get more international intercultural competencies, how they can become more global citizenship without necessarily have to move. A similar movement around that time was happening in Australia and the UK, to a certain extent also in Canada and the US, but mostly the UK and Australia, where there was a reaction to the very strong revenue-driven international student recruitment in those countries, saying, well, but what about the content of the curriculum that those international students get, that our local students get? Is that really international? Is that really intercultural? Should we not much more focus on internationalization of the curriculum? And as a result of that, there was a strong movement even 10 years ago, when we saw that there was not so much change yet in the focus on mobility, about rethinking internationalization. An essay that Uwe Brandenburg and I wrote in 2011, The End of Internationalization, was basically saying, we are treating international education as a tradable commodity much more than as a content-wise focus on international intercultural values, about citizenship development, about internationalization for society, for the Sustainable Development Goals. So we should end this focus on international mobility as a movement. Also, you see back in the comprehensive internationalization approach that was happening in the United States at that time, to say we have to internationalize the whole of the institution. We should not fragment it to mobility and study abroad. We saw also a movement by the International Association of Universities about rethinking internationalization. We really have to go back to those values. But the reality was that until this COVID-19 crisis started, that still the focus in international education was on mobility, on the movement of students, on the movement of faculty, and increasingly also on the movement of administrators and also of educational leaders. We go to massive conferences, NAFSA, EAE, the Australian International Education Conference, AMPE in Mexico, FOBAI in Brazil. There was always more conferences taking place, and it increased every time. If I wanted, I could speak or present on a conference every week of the year. So we were extremely in this mood and continue to be in this mood of the only way we can communicate with each other is by mobility and by stepping into planes. And that was the reason why Philip Albach and I a few months ago said to ourselves, where are we? We are talking about values and principles of international education. We're talking about sustainable development goals as an important driver for international education. But in reality, what we all do, and that includes me and him, we are still traveling. We are still moving around and contributing to the pollution of our planet. And should we not start to address the challenges related to that? And we came across the Karin network at that time, and so we made reference to it in our blog and University World News, and really recognizing the importance that from the field itself, from even the business, you can say, as one of the founders in her introduction said, that even there, they are becoming aware of the importance that we have to change our approach to international education. It's important to say that we should not abolish mobility at all. It's not possible, it's not desirable, because the interaction in person between individuals, between students, between teachers, between administrators, is an important way of understanding how we are interacting with each other in the world. And so it contributes to mutual understanding that we have this possibility to meet each other. But at the same time, it is important that we say it is not only necessary to do it that way. And so movements like internationalization at home, collaborative online international learning, global citizenship development, and internationalization curriculum, all those movements were important and increasingly became much more part of our agenda of international education. But as I said before, not really making still a substantial change. So what we have to do? And in that sense, I must say the COVID-19 crisis creates an opportunity. An opportunity to understand that it is possible also to communicate in a different way. As has been mentioned in the introduction, this summit was already planned to be virtual. But what we see now that other organizations like NASA and the European Association for International Education, etc., have had to decide to cancel their conferences and provide virtual alternatives. And that we see everywhere. Now we are at Zoom, sometimes in my case, 5 or 6 times a day to meet with other people, to give webinars and to give this kind of summits and to teach classes, etc. And what you then see is how surprisingly interactive and international, intercultural these kind of events are. When in the past I had to go to a conference in, let's say, Brazil, I had to travel for a full day to get there with all the impact on pollution. I also had then to speak to maybe 300 people, mainly from the Latin American region. And then I had to travel back for a full day, and that was my experience. In itself, I would not say that that is bad. But what we see now that I have webinars, and including this summit, where I can reach 400 people. And 400 people from all over the world who connect via Zoom or other platforms and who are able to ask questions, to make comments, to provide feedback. So it is much more international and intercultural than all those workshops, seminars, conferences that are organized around the world. So let's learn from that experience. Let's see that we can also think when we organize something, we do it differently. My own Center for International Higher Education was planning to organize a conference in October and for our 25th anniversary, and now we decided to postpone it for a year, but also do something virtual and see how we then can do it differently. And so what I see is also the fascinating experimenting by doing it. Like you do it in the Americas event and in a Pacific event, because you have to deal with the time zones. That you do it not over a full day with lots of presentations, because people, certainly on the internet, but the reality is also in many conferences, don't have the time span to listen more than 20 minutes to a speaker. So if you have then a webinar or a summit with 10 presenters, it doesn't really work. So you have to do it differently. So it's fascinating to see how much we learn from this experience to experiment in different way of communications. And let's only hope that we're not going back to normal after the crisis is over. First of all, we don't know how long it will take. And if the reality is, it might be that this crisis never gets over, but there will always be surges again or new pandemics coming to us. So we have to say it is not a wise idea to go back to the situation of pre-COVID-19. We cannot reset the button and think that we are going to recruit international students in the same way as we have been doing before. by organizing all fairs around the world, by having massive movements of students, etc. We have to be much more creative. We have to be much more virtual, but we also have to say, maybe not always is necessary to go abroad. Maybe we can do it differently. We can do it virtually by dual degree programs, etc. We have to be much more innovative, creative, to give an alternative. And again, as I said before, I'm not against mobility. I think mobility is a very important part of our life, and in particular the intercultural communication that we learn from that. My own experience as a student when I was for a year in Peru has been really life-changing for me, as has been the experience of all who have been traveling and studying abroad. So I will not say we should stop that, but we can look at ways how we can reduce the numbers, how we can use the number of activities, how we can create alternatives for those who are not yet mobile, and to do much more virtually, as we should do, to make not only the planet better, but also to make international education much more inclusive. Because the reality also is that the mobility is only for a very few group. The mobility of degree-seeking students is mainly from the higher middle class in the developing world to the global north. The mobility for home degrees is from elite students in the United States who have the resources to do that. So it has always been a reality that international education has been very elitist. And so not only from the point of view of climate, also from the point of view to make it much more inclusive, it is important that we go much more focusing on the digital opportunities that this COVID crisis has manifested, but very well there already before we didn't use them. So that, in my view, is very important to do. And we, as leaders in international education, and we, as including myself, have to give the right example. Higher education rectors and other leaders have also to learn that many of the meetings that they organize can be done virtually, that we know now how to do it, that we know how to mute and unmute ourselves, that we know how to share screens, that we have to be capable to be much more interactive than if we would be meeting physically. So it is a unique opportunity as a result of COVID-19 that we can move forward, making international education much more climate neutral. We should take that chance. We should not go back to the old times, but take advantage of the lessons learned over the past months. And we need the full support and the actions and the motivations that the founders of the Karin network have given us to really make international education much more at the service of society and of our planet. And with that, I close my keynote and look forward to further discussions. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor DeWitt. That was really wonderful. And, you know, it echoed a lot about what we heard in the Australia Summit yesterday. Rebecca Hall had posted in our chat a quote that said, "Nothing should go back to normal. Normal wasn't working. If we go back the way we were, we have lost the lesson. May we rise up and do better." And that sounds very much like the message we received today. So thank you so much for joining us. That was really wonderful. For coming up next, we've got Robin Shields, Professor of Education at Bristol University. Before we go over to Robin, and he was in yesterday's summit and he will be joining us in our leadership panel, just a reminder, we're in the chat function. If you're going to engage, there's a little drop-down menu. It's right now set to default to all panelists, but we do encourage you to click down and set all panelists and attendees so that everyone can see what you are saying, not just our panelists. So thank you very much. And with that, I will sort of hand it over to Robin.
Hello. My name is Robin Shields, and I'm a Professor of Education at the University of Bristol. Even though we're separated by time and by distance, I'm very excited to be speaking with you today, and I'd like to thank the conference organizers for making that possible. I'd welcome your thoughts and feedback via Twitter @RobinShields or through other conversations that happen in the course of the conference. My title today is Between a Rock and a Hard Place, Finding a Way Forward for International Higher Education. By this title, I mean that higher education is facing two sets of difficult challenges in terms of internationalization. The first is that current models of internationalization are not sustainable. And I mean sustainability here in a broad sense, encapsulating many kinds of sustainability. The first is in relation to climate change. So there are about 5 million students who go to another country for studies in higher education every year, and most of them travel by airplane, and this has an immense carbon footprint. So in one study, I've estimated that this is between 14 and 39 megatons of carbon emitted into the atmosphere every year, which is comparable to the entire emissions of small to medium-sized countries. So this is obviously a large challenge in terms of sustainability. We cannot keep flying people around the world in the way that we have up until now and escape the very worst effects of climate change. Now, air travel is actually a relatively small component of global greenhouse gas emissions. It's less than 5%, but it is also one which is very unequal. So, for example, one long-haul flight, just a one-way flight, often produces more carbon than an individual in a low-income country will for the entire year in their lives. So there's a big inequality between those who are able to be mobile and those who are not. A second sense in which internationalization is not sustainable is in terms of skills and the job market. So universities pride themselves on equipping their graduates to be successful in a job market which is embedded in an economy which is fundamentally unsustainable. It's heavily reliant on carbon-based energy and environmental consumption which can't be sustained over the long term. The third way in which internationalization is not sustainable is in terms of inequality and access to higher education. So the ability to access international, or the ability to study abroad, is largely determined by the ability to pay, often higher tuition fees than students within the country of study will pay. And although there are scholarships available, many or most students have to be able to fund their own studies. This circumvents national policies which might emphasize equity of access for different groups or by gender, and so increases inequality over time. Third, the coronavirus crisis has highlighted that internationalization is not sustainable in terms of institutional funding and finances. So higher education institutions are generally supposed to be durable over long periods of time, but international enrollments can fluctuate wildly from year to year. Until now, this fluctuation has mainly been a pattern of growth, so it's benefited universities, and many have come to rely on international student enrollments as a core aspect of their financial model. However, the current crisis shows how what goes up can also come down, and so many universities are facing a large hole in their budget and looking at cutting staff numbers over the coming years due to fluctuation in international student enrollment. So this is another sense in which internationalization as we know it today is not sustainable. However, the other challenge is that international higher education is increasingly necessary. One reason is that there is a growth in right-wing nationalist and populist movements around the world. I am speaking to you today from the United Kingdom, and we certainly had our share here. These movements often embed racist or sexist ideologies and aim to pit different groups, national groups or ethnic groups, against one another. And so international higher education can help promote understanding between different nationalities, which can resist these movements or challenge them. The second is that there are many global challenges, such as climate change, such as the refugee crisis, that require cooperation between different nations, and international study can lay a valuable foundation for individuals to work across national borders and to work with different nationalities throughout their lives. So it's very necessary to face these challenges. And third, there are many well-documented benefits to international education, both for individuals and for universities. For individuals, these benefits include self-confidence, improved communication skills, greater tolerance towards other groups, and employability, better outcomes in the job market. For institutions, benefits include access to new curricula and also new research opportunities. So we are currently between a rock and a hard place. We have these two challenges, and so the question is, how do we move forward? I've outlined 4 very brief hypothetical paths forward that we could take, and I'll discuss them briefly. The first would be, following presumably a downturn from the coronavirus over the next year or two, to resume business as usual, or to try to revert to the methods of internationalization that we've been doing. This will be tempting because it will offer a source of revenue for universities, but over the longer term, it's almost certainly unsustainable. The current levels of greenhouse gas emissions that we are producing as a global society will almost certainly result in catastrophic climate change if we don't address this, and universities will certainly suffer from those effects. The second would be to move to more sustainable forms of provision, so to look at how we can offer courses by distance education, hold academic conferences online, such as this one, or perhaps work in partnerships to deliver courses overseas. The courses would then be sustainable, and we'd be kind of highlighting a sustainable model of provision, but we would still be providing graduates for an economy and a society which are fundamentally unsustainable. So a third way to move forward would be to transform higher education, to look at the types of research that we conduct, the teaching that we do, the types of knowledge that we value, and perhaps look to alternative knowledge systems, indigenous education in many parts of the world, to create a form of higher education that puts sustainability at the center and produces graduates that think in a different way, perhaps an industry or society would want at the moment, but who can reshape society to become more sustainable. And finally, we can look at higher education as an agent for transformation. So although universities are dependent upon national governments for funding, they can also push back in a way and create change within a society. So they can influence companies, they can influence governments to change current economic models to become more sustainable. And so obviously the fourth ideal is kind of the best outcome. It's somewhat utopian, and so like many educators or researchers in education, I think I'm very quick to advocate transformation, but the challenge is always, how do we get there? How do we get to this great vision? And I think it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to be incremental change. And so the best thing we can do actually is to look at what we did last year and try to improve upon it. So I'm actually a huge favor of incremental change, a huge advocate of incremental change. This transformation doesn't happen overnight. I think it's going to happen through people progressively trying to improve on what they've been doing in the past. But there's a sense of urgency to this. So we need to look at what we've been doing and really push ourselves to try and do a lot better each year. The coronavirus crisis has been a tragedy and has disrupted lives in many different senses, but it will offer us a chance to kind of think things anew, consider the situation afresh, and it will build up a whole set of experiences and abilities to work together online, as we see through this conference. So the next thing we can do is to lead by example. If we expect small businesses that are often squeezed for cash to undergo big changes to become sustainable, we need to show that universities, which are relatively privileged and have large budgets, can do the same. So we need to show what is possible, such as working together online to create meaningful change, as we're doing here. And I think that is the best way to get from where we are, between the rock and the hard place, to something which is much better. So the message here is that although internationalization as we know it is not sustainable, the answer is not to back away from internationalization, but actually to push forward, to become more international, but to do it in a different, more reflective, more intelligent way, which considers environmental costs and tries to show what would be possible if all organizations were to act as we do. So thank you very much for your time and attention. I look forward to hearing your thoughts, either online or in discussions that follow.
Thank you so much. That was Robin Shields. He will be joining our leadership panel. Some really powerful stuff there about how, you know, international education is they're not necessarily competing forces. The climate action and international education can be powerful forces when working in tandem to make an impact. So looking forward to hearing more on the leadership panel later. Now, we promised you short little sessions and some engagement, and so I am about to deliver. On the questions, so we've got some polls for you, some quick questions to just set the scene and get a sense of how you're feeling to date. So you can see those questions have popped up on your screen, so we encourage you to we just want to get a sense of which aspects of climate action and international education interest you the most. So we certainly want to make sure that you're seeing those and are able to answer. We'll give you a few minutes. They should have just popped up on your screen. This will really help us because as we do Q&A, understanding these interests will also give us a sense of how to engage with our panelists, and we encourage you to use that Q&A function so that we can then see and moderate those discussions based on your interests here. So that will be super helpful. So we've got a good chunk of responses in. Thank you to everyone who is participating. This gives us a really good sense. So I'm just going to end the poll and then you can see the results here. So it's clear that people want to have a better understanding of, you know, incorporating climate issues into study abroad and short-term programs. And so that works really well, and we're super keen to share some of that. Now we also have one more question for you, just 1 second poll, which should pop up on the screen momentarily. So how confident do you feel that you understand the climate issues and the available solutions for international education? This is our first summit, and this will really help us shape not just how we talk about what we're going to be sharing today, but also in the future. So thank you to everyone. Those answers came in fast and furious. That's amazing. And so you can see there, people are feeling pretty confident. So that's nice. And there's obviously an opportunity to improvement because there's so many leaders in this event. And so we really want to make sure that we're arming you with all the information that you have, and so that you can feel highly confident. So that will be super helpful in the future. So thank you. Great. So moving on, we've got a wonderful panel coming up where we're going to talk about, you know, we've talked about big sweeping change. We've talked about some incremental steps that are urgent. So we wanted to join, there are some providers with us who are really going to talk about meeting people where they are. So we've got a panel on sort of cases for practical reduction on greenhouse gas emissions. So we are going to see a video from Canada Homestay from Jennifer Wilson, the managing director, as well as Brooke Matta and Melissa Burkett, who are the admissions counselor and director of partnership development, respectively, for global education. And then they will be joined by our master moderator, Eddie West, for some Q&A. So be sure to pop those questions in the Q&A.
Hi, my name is Jennifer Wilson. I'm the Managing Director of Canada Homestay Network. We are a small, not-for-profit family business. Well, not so small anymore. It was started by my mom 25 years ago back in Toronto, and we have since grown to be the largest homestay organization in the country with over 140 employees, serving more than 80,000 students since we started, about 10,000 students a year now. And we have almost 6,000 host families across Canada who we count among the wonderful people who help support our students when they come to study here. We look after about 100 client educators across Canada. That's made up of language schools, private high schools, publicly funded high schools, universities, and colleges, again, from coast to coast. I'm excited to talk to you today about our initiatives in the green economy. We realized about 8 years ago that we could be doing more. My colleague Nathan was in a program at BCIT at the time and did an analysis of our organization and where we could have the most influence and impact. As you can see from this diagram, we're connected immediately to our homestays and our clients and schools, and a little farther reaching from our agents that help support students who come to study in Canada and the students themselves through the additional services that they're offered, such as flights and travel and their schools and so on. So we felt like we would have the most impact with our host families. And we understand too that the way to reach people is not through drastic calls to action or dire warnings. It's through encouragement of small, gradual changes. It's through meeting them where they are and finding the story inside of every statistic. It's through these baby steps. I think nearly everyone agrees that environmental problems are important, but we aren't acting fast enough to solve them. And people believe taking action on environmental problems is either inaccessible, unaffordable, or less urgent than other problems. And even if you do take action, it's hard to feel the impact of what you do on the bigger problem. I think we need to speak more to people outside of our community using inclusive language and powerful images to make everyone feel they have the ability to take action in their day-to-day to create a more sustainable environment. So based on the recommendations that Nathan found in his analysis of CHN, we realized, of course, that we could make a difference with host families. So the first thing we did was write a green housing guide, which has tips for reducing your home's impact on the environment, and we've since expanded it to include some tips on how to talk to students about climate change using language that will help reach them. We also, as an organization, are Bullfrog powered. Bullfrog Power is a Canadian company that invests in various renewable projects all across the country. Bullfrog ensures that for every kilowatt hour of electricity you use as an individual or a business, that they will invest in a renewable source and inject that same amount of energy into the grid on your behalf. Bullfrog Power also owns a company called LESS, which does carbon offsets, and we encourage our students to use those carbon offsets. We have a lot of other initiatives that I'm excited to talk to you about and to share. We're happy to share our resources and ideas as understanding that we are part of a larger community that's all trying to make a difference and that we could combine our efforts and have a bigger impact. So just want to say thank you and appreciate all of the work that all of you are doing and look forward to continuing the conversation.
In January of 2020, Global Experiences launched its Green Initiative. The purpose of this initiative is simple: become carbon neutral by 2025 in response to the overwhelming global climate crisis. To begin, we determined that our main focuses would be, first and foremost, offsetting the flights of all interns on our programs by supporting diverse climate projects, and second, adding a green education to the intern experience, from start to finish. We believe that in a world where our individual and collective actions make a difference, it's our duty to implement green and sustainable practices wherever possible. We hope that interns are excited to make sustainable choices with Global Experiences and that other organizations are inspired to adopt similar practices. We calculated that during the spring of 2020, interns on our programs around the world had flights that produced 338 tons of carbon emissions. We then offset these emissions with the purchase of carbon credits at no additional cost to the interns. The projects we chose to support are reforestation in Australia, safe water access in Rwanda, and wind power in India. We're proud to help interns reduce their carbon footprints and prioritize sustainability through these important projects. As for the green education part of our initiative, we incorporated resources for interns to use throughout their programs. Their pre-departure orientation contains resources about how to be green in their cities, how to pack and travel in a more sustainable way, as well as how to reduce and recycle while abroad. Upon arrival, their orientation emphasizes these key topics and engages them with green challenges throughout their time abroad. While our green initiative is just getting started, we're so excited to see where it takes us and to continue adding new processes to meet our challenge of carbon neutrality by 2025. In the words of our founder and CEO, Global Experiences was founded to make the world a better place, and we can no longer deliver on this vision without a serious commitment to protecting the environment.
All right, that was great. Thank you so much to our co-presenters and panelists. I think Brooke and Melissa and Jennifer, if you are all there, and I think you are, it's good to see you. Thank you again, and I just wanted to kind of kick off by asking a few questions. One, I think I'll start with Brooke, you and Melissa. Could you elaborate a little bit more on the specific actions that your organization has taken in terms of the carbon offsetting work that you're doing?
Sure, Ed, I can field that question. It's Melissa here. So carbon offsetting might seem like a daunting process, but we've actually found it to be quite easy. It's in essence a two-step process. So first, you really just need to calculate the number of carbon emissions that your travel is producing, and then purchase the credits to offset the emissions. So basically for calculating your flights, there are many calculators out there. We chose to use climatecare.org. Virtually any form of travel, plane, car, train. We did this for our students' round trip flights because we know round trip flights are one of the biggest producer of carbon emissions that a student may have in a year. So yeah, we estimated the number of tons to be 338 for our spring interns. And then there are a number of other resources where you can locate sustainable projects and carbon negative projects, essentially. So neutralizing the effect of the carbon emissions, purchasing those carbon credits to go towards those projects. So yeah, it's a very simple two-step process. It was not as expensive as we thought it was going to be. So we were able to not raise the program fees for the students, which we feel like is very important. And as Brooke mentioned in the video, the projects that we chose were reforestation in Australia, clean water in Rwanda, and wind power in India.
That is so cool. That is so cool. Thank you. The next question actually is for you, Jennifer. And your organization is all about host families and hosting international students. And I imagine, given the sheer size of your organization and how many families and how many students you work with, folks' opinions may vary as to the urgency of addressing climate change in their work and lives. And I just wonder if you could share a little bit more about how you've approached that work specifically with your host families.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think you're absolutely right. It's hard. I think something I struggle with personally and professionally is how much to thrust my passions on other people. Like, what are we sort of obligated to do when it comes to talking about these issues, and how much do you push your perspective? So we've taken a very soft approach. We've just sort of made the resources available and hoped that people would be interested. But I also recognize the folks who read the Green Hosting Guide are people who are probably already engaged and interested and want to know how they can do better. So I'm really curious as part of this conversation to talk about how we can reach people who aren't already thinking about this stuff. But the other thing that I would, so yes, the Green Hosting Guide, and yeah, we've also hosted seminars and workshops, and we have an online certification course for host families that helps them sort of walk through what's required of them as a host, and we talk about it in there a little bit. We have a newsletter that goes out to hosts every few months, and that always has a footnote about Bullfrog Power. Host families can sign up as a friend of CHN and have a $25 credit the first month that they enroll with Bullfrog Power. So, you know, we're doing all of these things, and I hope it's having an impact, but I don't really know. I think probably the most helpful and appealing aspect of what we talk about is the cost savings. So that's really what reaches the host. When we say you can save money on your, you know, the whole hosting experience, or this can help you with your finances, I think that's what really speaks to people more broadly.
Very cool. So now this next question is really for any and all of you. As we think, I mean, between Robin Shields' presentation and Hans de Wit's presentation and so many other speakers, both on the Australia, Asia, New Zealand session yesterday and now today's, you know, it's a very future focused kind of conversation. What do each of you maybe see for the future of your own work, whether as an individual professional and or on behalf of the organization you work to support? Like maybe say 5-10 years down the line, or even, you know, the next year or more.
Yeah, I'll start. There's a lot that I think we could be doing differently in the future. And I noticed there's in the Q&A here, there was a question about what we're doing or what institutions are doing to embed climate literacy and green education of international students. And that I wanted to answer that, but before I did, I just want to highlight the idea that we're a partner of the educators. We're not in the classroom talking to the students day to day. And I wonder where the intersection of what the educator's sort of responsibility is to speak to students and engage with students, and how we can, as a homestay provider or any other number of vendors that work in this field, like insurance providers or tour providers, or, you know, all of these folks who are part of the network that supports the industry. And perhaps we've been remiss in not doing more. I think I've made the mistake of assuming that that is the responsibility of the educator and not us, but I think that's probably wrong. So that's one thing we could do differently, is I think make more efforts for ourselves to incorporate it in our student orientations, for example, and host orientations, which we already do. So more training, more workshops for hosts and students. I want to survey hosts. So if it weren't for COVID-19, we would have already done that. That was part of our plan for this year, but it felt a little tone deaf to reach out to them and talk about that right now. But, you know, curious about what you think about that too. So want to survey our hosts about what's working and how we can engage them better. And do they know that the Green Hosting Guide exists, and how can we reach them better? I think we could be reducing travel even more. I think our speakers already mentioned this, but this idea that we can survive using Zoom is not going to go away. And I hope we can do more recruitment and you know, conversations with our clients and that kind of thing with Zoom. And I think we can take a firmer stance on carbon offsets too. So we haven't been able to fund those. We're a nonprofit and we just don't have the resources to pay for carbon offsets for all of our students. But I think we could have that embedded in the invoice as a standard, that they pay for that as part of their homestay fee. And then they would have to opt out rather than opting in. You know, little adjustments like that could be quite profound as well. So yes, we could always do more. That's the message here.
I can jump in and chat a little bit about what Global Experiences plan is. So we really just rolled out our green initiative about 6 months ago. We are still at the early stages, but it's a 5-year plan. Our goal is to be carbon neutral by 2025. So there are some things that we have already put in place and some things that are definitely still to come. Of course, we're going to continue offsetting flights for not only our interns, but also our staff members as well. So just trying to make any type of travel that our organization does, like offset it and make it carbon neutral. Another big thing that we've talked about doing is an energy audit, similar to what it sounds like Jennifer and CHN have been prioritizing. So looking at sustainable energy sources, efficient lighting, our HVAC usage, things like that. So just from a more organizational standpoint. And then a few things that we've talked about adding on the educational side for our interns specifically are just continuing to build out those activities and challenges for them related to sustainable living while they're abroad. We've also talked about adding a green or sustainable scholarship, maybe having green ambassadors on the ground, which would be really cool just to represent those values with their peers. Looking at doing like a blog series with green updates and just information for the community at large. So we are trying to have a holistic approach, not just, you know, how can we be carbon neutral, but also how can we educate and inspire people along the way and hopefully create a ripple effect.
It's awesome. All right, well, I mean, thank you all so much again. I actually am going to make a final ask as we're about to close because Jennifer, you're right. You pointed to some really great questions in the Q&A session that's come through. So I think what we want to do is post these on the LinkedIn discussion group. And if I could impose upon you to respond to those questions there after the fact, that would be awesome. So with that,
Eddie, we actually have an FAQ doc as well that we're planning to upload to the LinkedIn group. So if anyone wants to refer back to information about what Global Experience is doing, we'll put it there for everyone.
That's perfect. And I think we're going to have your green guide there too, Jennifer, on that note. So thank you all again. So fun to see you. And I think I'm going to turn it over back to CJ.
Thank you.
Beautiful. That was so wonderful. Thank you so much. It was nice to see you guys. And thank you for those, practical steps. And as we talk about what that future looks like. And when we talk about that future, it's, connected to the students where, there are students, but it's their future. And, we can't wait for them to become in positions of power and use their voice. So we want to hear from them. And hear what they want. So we did a major call for student feedback so we could hear their voices. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to them.
Hi, my name is Taylor. I'm from Glendale, Arizona. I'm studying geography with an emphasis in environmental and physical sciences, as well as a minor in leadership. And climate action is important to me because it would mean social justice and equity for so many people. It makes economic sense. And the only reason we're not, as a world, coming together to tackle this is because of politics or special interests. And as a university, we can help by in relation to travel by tracking and sharing all carbon emissions related to travel in very detailed reports with the public and everybody and gain knowledge from that. And then we can also start by investing in travel companies that have committed to clean energy as well as carbon offsets.
Hi, my name is Simran Jain. I live in San Diego, California, and I'm a business and political science major. I go to SDSU, and at SDSU, I work towards climate action. I believe climate action is so important because I'm a huge proponent of social justice, and I think that climate change and social justice are very intertwined, and we can't stop climate change and not talk about social justice. And so in order to mitigate our climate crisis, we need to start taking more real actions, and that starts with the institutions that we are in. I believe that San Diego State should be taking their money out of fossil fuel companies and divesting from them because they need to show that their students' voice is more important than any investments that might be hurting the planet but maybe helping their wallet. They need to be showing that they care more about their students' lives and futures than they care about their profits.
Hey, I'm Courtney. I am from San Diego and I'm a senior at San Diego State University, and I am studying sustainability, and climate action is super important to me. To me, sustainable travel at SDSU has a lot to do with our local community. We have a transit stop on campus with connections to our transit system and bus, and I think that's super cool and needs to be utilized for students. Parking should be focused on carpooling and different forms of travel, and we should definitely focus on active transit and maybe even include study abroad programs where people can learn about different forms of transit. So I think we have a huge opportunity to make our carbon footprint smaller by pursuing different forms of transportation systems.
My name is McKenna Avery, and I'm from Redlands, but San Diego is my new home. I'm studying sustainability and political science. Climate action is so important to me because we can't have any other problems without solving this one first. Regarding educational travel, I want my university to adopt carbon offsets for all travel and to engage in meaningful social projects every trip. Thank you!
Hello everyone, my name is Jansen O'Toole. I'm currently a junior here at San Diego State University, studying international business with a minor in sustainability and an emphasis in Portuguese. And I'm originally from Northern Virginia. For me, climate action is everything. It's the #1 issue our world's facing right now, and I think before we can make any progress elsewhere, we're going to need to learn how to live on this world sustainably. And for me, I think the #1 thing my university can do to promote educational travel is to partner with the Good Traveler. It's a nonprofit that allows you to offset your carbon footprint from flying.
Thank you so much to those students. That plea came across loud and clear. That was a group of domestic students at San Diego State University who engage in study abroad. And so I see in the comments, you want to know more about those students, and that's great. And we had so many videos, we weren't even able to show you all of them. So we will be sharing them in our LinkedIn page, in our discussion group. You'll see them on social media. So we will be featuring the voices of those students ongoing. And so while we are on the topic of students, and you could see how optimistic they are dealing with anxiety that is real. And so I want to welcome our next presenters, Anne Campbell and T. Nguyen, an assistant professor and master's candidates respectively from the Middlebury Institute of International Studies. And so we're going to show you a presentation, and then they will be joined by Eddie for a discussion.
Greetings from the Middlebury Institute of International Studies in Monterey, California. My name is Dr. Anne Campbell, and I'm an assistant professor, and I'm here with T. Nguyen, a master's candidate. We are pleased to share this presentation as part of the International Education Climate Action Summit. The title of our presentation is Climate Anxiety and International Student Mobility, Overcoming Eco-Paralysis. We will begin by sharing our main takeaway messages with you. After that, we will define key terms and explain our interest and position in the topic. Then we will discuss the 3 main takeaway messages again in greater detail towards the goal of moving beyond climate anxiety and eco-paralysis and towards climate action in international education. So right at the beginning, here are our 3 take-home messages for administrators and faculty, which we will return to and explain in depth later. First, we recommend that practitioners and faculty acknowledge the concerns of young people in terms of climate anxiety and eco-paralysis. Second, we advocate for practitioners and faculty to recognize and address the links between social justice and the unequal impact of global warming. And third, we encourage administrators and faculty to advocate for climate action, both during and after the Education Abroad program, as a way to address climate anxiety and to help the planet.
Thank you, Anne, for the introduction. So there are 2 key terms that are important to this presentation. They are climate anxiety and eco-paralysis. Climate anxiety is the chronic emotional distress induced by climate change-related events. It stems from the growing awareness of the direct and indirect environmental impact on individuals' lives. Eco-paralysis is a state of feeling overwhelmed by climate change and not knowing what to do about it. In the context of this presentation, we will combine climate anxiety and eco-paralysis as one single phenomenon. This phenomenon refers to the immobility of students' minds in the face of climate change, despite the physical mobility. what usually happens is in deciding whether or not to pursue opportunities abroad, students would almost always feel conflicted, knowing that their educational travels contribute to polluting the planet. Due to their under-addressed concerns, many students choose skepticism or ignorance as a coping strategies, which is counterproductive to both student learning and environmental sustainability. So before diving deeper into our study and recommendations, Anne and I would like to make clear our positionality on this particular topic. We both come from a graduate institution in California that deeply values international exchange and cross-cultural learning. As international education specialists, we believe that global solidarity is needed now more than ever to prepare the next generations to tackle global challenges, such as climate change. Our values also stem from the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals 4 and 13. These two goals, when placed side by side, demonstrate the purpose of education as supportive of both student mobility and a sustainable future, which show us that going global and going green should not be viewed as two contrasting narratives. To us, there are new frontiers regarding the role of international education that have yet to be thoroughly discussed. Therefore, we are eager to exchange ideas and learn from other people at the conference.
So from our observations in the field and our work with students, we see signs of anxiety and eco-paralysis among our students and colleagues. And from our perception, it seems even more pronounced in the younger generation. And while we don't have all the answers, we do think that things can be learned from the research and program design that has come before us, and from conversations like the ones happening during this conference. We have some initial ideas to put forward today as considerations to live with climate anxiety and to move beyond eco-paralysis towards action for the planet. Our first recommendation for administrators and faculty is to acknowledge that their students may be experiencing climate anxiety and that they and their students and colleagues may have eco-paralysis. This means addressing these concerns in classes and through program design and across disciplines. The academic literature seems to support the idea of eco-paralysis and climate anxiety among students today. Kelly found that those who take environmental studies courses, especially for the first time, find the lessons to be crushing. Yet Kelly noted that few classes in the study help students handle the emotional stress of climate change or allow them to, quote, feel empowered and ready to take action after class, unquote. Moreover, Robinson found that while faculty are aware of the importance of addressing climate change topics in their curricula across disciplines, that university educators were unprepared to be involved in extensive interdisciplinary teaching and preferred to teach within the safety of their own subject boundaries. Verily provides one idea here as a way forward, arguing that faculty should guide students towards a, quote, live with climate change, unquote, approach to channel the feelings of guilt, frustration, and grief towards fixing the flaws and injustices in the existing systems. Based on these points and other findings, we recommend that faculty and administrators acknowledge and incorporate issues related to climate change and climate anxiety into education abroad programs, including helping students to live with their climate anxiety.
We also believe that there's a need to address a link between the environment and social justice, as this approach can help bring different students' communities together and motivate them to commit to climate action. From our observations, many students are indeed tirelessly trying to identify a course of action to tackle climate issues in their own education. In 2016, when Fischer conducted interviews with youth climate activists, he found that positioning climate change as strictly an environmental issues, such as flying less and saving the polar bears, greatly undermined the wide range of life experiences and perspectives that had shaped this field. In 2014, El Zabi and Els Ansari found that students in the Netherlands were highly concerned about global warming, but their worries were linked more directly to the inequitable impacts of global warming. And they understood that combating climate change was also about fighting for the rights of underprivileged groups. From these findings, we believe that eco-paralysis and climate anxiety can be enhanced when students are aware of the environmental toll of climate change, but are unable to connect this aspect to their own individuals' lives. This can be a very isolating experience. To support students, international education programs should incorporate curricular lessons and approaches on our global interconnectedness and environmental justice. In this way, students can envision using their own education as a way to not only give back to environmental causes, but also contribute to the socio-economic well-being of the larger society. In doing this, we can further bridge the perceived gap between student mobility and sustainability.
Our third recommendation is to advocate for climate action both during and after the Education Abroad program. So for example, Dvorak and colleagues argue that faculty members leading study abroad programs should be responsible for framing productive discussions with students and other institutional stakeholders and partners surrounding sustainable choices in study abroad. Buckley and colleagues argue that education abroad taught, quote, critical sustainability principles that would be difficult to replicate if students did not leave their home university, unquote. However, while education abroad might be transformative, the ways that students can implement these new lessons at home were not addressed. Paradoxically, if students return home to face structural or cultural barriers to implementing these new sustainability lessons, this could potentially lead to increased feelings of disempowerment and anxiety. In our review of programs, we found many great examples of campuses who were incorporating sustainability lessons into their curricula and on their campuses, providing opportunities for students returning from study abroad and for international students to be involved in these initiatives. We have mentioned a few here on this slide, including from the University of Melbourne and Lehigh University and Dickinson University. Later in the presentation, we'll provide a link if you want to learn more information about these initiatives.
So as you see, overcoming eco-paralysis in the space of international education requires strong collaboration among students, administrators, professors, and institutions. It takes a great deal of courage from all parties to think and act differently to improve life in different corners of the world and advance together toward a more just and sustainable society. This brings us to the end of our presentation. Thank you all so much for joining us. Our contact information is on the screen.
As a final point, we wanted to share this bit.ly link. It's an open link of some of our resources and programs that we've been looking at to help shape our upcoming research project. We hope that these might also be helpful to you in your own work. Indeed, the work of helping to preserve the planet and reverse the effect of global warming belongs to all of us.
All right. Thank you so much, Ann and T. That was amazing. Even though it's, I think, now the third time I've watched your video, it gets better each time. Really pleased to have some time with you today to start some Q&A, if I may. I think you wanted, though, before we did that, to talk a little bit more possibly about some of the references or resources you mentioned.
Yes, thanks, Eddie. It was a pleasure for us to be part of this event, and we're also learning so much from our colleagues. So thank you all for your contributions. Into the chat, I'll put the bit.ly link that we just mentioned in the presentation in case you want to look at those sources. And then also, there's a piece from the Washington Post magazine that came out earlier this year that has really kind of shaped our thinking around climate anxiety, also known as eco-anxiety, that you might want to take a look at. So we welcome questions as well, but I'll just add those to the chat now.
Very cool, very cool. So I think, if I may, the first question, I want to talk a little bit about how you and your work, both of your work, is focused a lot on faculty and administrators and sort of organizational responsibilities or responses to climate change. I wonder if, T, if you could talk a little bit about the perspective of students themselves, because earlier we saw some of our student videos. You know, many of them are very, very passionate about this topic. If you could share a little bit about that, it would be great.
Yeah, so currently I'm a graduate student at the Middlebury Institute of International Studies. I'm an aspiring international educator, so I deeply value the cross-cultural exchange and international partnership in education, but at the same time, I also believe that these activities must not be facilitated or promoted at the expense of environmentally harmful practices. And so at the same time, like from my professional experiences, I also believe that students cannot freely pursue their dreams and ambitions if their participation in cross-border mobility means that they are putting the planet in danger. So I just think from my perspective, like when students are burdened with responsibilities from the older generations and just don't know what to do about it, like many of them resort to indifference or denial, which is, I think this is very disempowering in a lot of ways. And so I realized that, and it brought me to this question, like, what does international student mobility even do if it's not mobilizing students to come together and just tackle global problems like climate change? And so, yeah, and so what I'm advocating for is that students learn to not separate environmental factors from their own educational decisions and pursuits. So instead of relying on like a top-down approach, I want students to just, you know, maybe like just stop waiting for change to happen and just start exploring different pathways in their own education through which they can respond to climate change, using their own education and potentially generate change over time. So for example, they can advocate for sustainability and environmental justice in their own area of study. Like, because climate change is truly a very interdisciplinary field. Students can also lead climate activism on their own campuses and help connect people from different backgrounds over climate issues. So from my perspective, that are some of the ways that students can take action. And they should really learn how to, ideally, they should learn how to not only live up to their full potential and just like participate in the global workforce, but at the same time, they should also learn to become socially responsible citizens in this planet, in this ever-changing planet. So, yeah.
100% agreed. Thank you, T. So my next question, I think, is for either one of you, T or Anne. So, you know, I was really struck by Jennifer of the Canadian Homestay organization, her comment that she struggles with how much to insert herself and her passions into her conversations with host families. And it made me realize that, you know, in addition to eco-paralysis among some students and staff and faculty, there's also maybe such a thing as like eco-apathy or eco-indifference or eco-unawareness. And I wonder, you know, we're all united in this call today and so many more out there in the field because of an interest in this area. What could you share about whether from an organizational or university level response or even, you know, individual education abroad advisor working with a certain student as to how to approach conversations that might involve students just being kind of oblivious or indifferent to the fact that this is an urgent issue? In other words, how do we ask and answer the question, to what extent do we insert ourselves and our views in those conversations?
Sure, I can start and then I can pass it to T. This is actually where we started this research project, is that we actually had this puzzle of how most of the people that we knew in international education or who researched in these areas, they were very interested in social justice. They were very aware of the impacts that student mobility has on the planet, and yet very little was being done. And it seemed to be kind of the elephant in the room or the monolith of how do we go past this? How do we move forward? And I think that has really spurred our research and kind of shaped some of our thinking about this, is really kind of how do you enter those conversations? And earlier speakers have talked about leading by example, but I think we don't, at least from my perception, yet feel comfortable with the culture of raising these issues, of talking about it. And part of it is coming, if I may be so bold, coming from people like me, who are not always listening as much as they can to their students, or are having the opportunity to kind of listen to these concerns and to sit with them and to think about how to respond. So we tried to shape our presentation towards actionable steps, and also really opening the door for that kind of activism, both during programs and after, so that people can move past a paralysis or an apathy towards an action.
That's great. T, did you have something to add, or?
No, that's basically covers everything that I want to say. So thank you, Anne.
Well, I do have one more question for you both. Your research, I mean, I saw how well responded to it was in yesterday's session in Australia, New Zealand, and Asia. And I can tell already too on today's session, there's a lot of interest. Where do you see your future sort of research going? What directions do you think are maybe more urgent than others in terms of a focus, research focus?
Sure, T, I'll start if that's okay. We've had a lot of conversations about this, both in the classroom and then through our research. And two things I think that we are interested in looking at. One is how present is this? As we mentioned in the video, it does seem that the literature supports both an awareness and a paralysis. So kind of what is the impact of these phenomena and how they're impacting education abroad in international student mobility. And then the other piece that we're particularly interested in is kind of the multiplicity and the diversity of voices and perspectives in this issue and around these issues. Looking at both domestic and international students, the diversity of learners, including younger learners in this situation. So we think there's a lot here to understand and are kind of eager to step into that space.
Yeah. So in terms of the direction of our research, we did talk a little bit about just conducting interviews with students, current university students, and see sort of like the context of climate anxiety in the current higher education context. So for example, how does the era of climate anxiety and climate change affects like student educational choices, like their choice of major, their community involvement, their educational aspirations, so things like that. Yeah, so it's still a little bit up in the air right now given the circumstances, but that's sort of like the direction that we intending to move towards, yeah, in our research.
That's great. That's great. Well, thank you so much again for the work that you're doing, for contributing to the summit today. I think you're both going to be engaging on hopefully on our LinkedIn discussion group and in conversations to come. So anyone who wants to connect with Ann and T, there you've got that LinkedIn avenue. I hope folks will reach out to you and vice versa. And thank you a lot again. So with that, I think I will turn it back over to our awesome MC, CJ.
Perfect. Thank you so much to you, Eddie, and to Anne and to T. Yesterday in the first session in New Zealand and Australia and Asia, Education New Zealand was speaking about digital marketing and virtual recruitment, and they put up on a screen, no one in Generation Z has any memory of a life without a screen, but then also dropped the very real and connected truth that no one in Gen Z has any memory of life without a climate crisis. So thank you so much to Anne and T for these very real recommendations for action that institutions can take. I think we're all a lot better off for having this discussion and this perspective of the climate issue come to light. So thank you again. Just gonna shift gears a little bit. Up next, we have a panel on sustainability and local community building. It's a conversation between Jessica Barlow, who is the executive director for the Center for Regional Sustainability at San Diego State University, as well as Daniel Ponce-Taylor, who is the Strategic Partnership Advisor at Intercultural Outreach Initiative, known as IOI. So I will ask them to join and turn on their cameras while we watch a short video for them just about painting the town green and some of Jessica Barlow's work at SDSU.
Maybe the city won't implement all of the ideas that students from last year came up with or the students in this class came up with, but in some cases you get a dialogue started. You get the community thinking, or you get the city thinking about maybe we really do need to make some changes.
We want to border the area with native succulents to kind of add to the character of the entire building complex.
The SAGE project is a partnership between SDSU and a local government. We work on projects that the city generates, and we match those projects with faculty in their courses, and the students then are carrying out these projects as part of their regular coursework, but these projects are real-world projects that can actually have an impact on the city's sustainability goals and the quality of life goals for their residents.
You've got a community that really wants to see some change and, you know, that is open to change. And then you come up with these invigorating ideas from these young people and the community is just absorbing it like a sponge.
What defines the character? The purpose of the class is to engage the students with thinking about how to analyze and then plan for appropriate land uses on a particular site. And National City is a great site for this project because we have many layers of government involved, and it provides the students with all these challenges.
I've learned so much about the different applications of geography and geographic information systems and urban planning, cultural planning, all these different aspects that you never would really think that geography encompasses have been accentuated in one single project.
The students are engaging in what we call high impact practices, and these are the kinds of experiences that we know from research increase graduation and retention rates. It makes them realize that they are part of our community and they can contribute to our community. And so even though they're part of a single class, the experience transcends the class, and it also, very importantly, helps them with problem solving. We want our future leaders to be good problem solvers, and we want them to be dealing with problems that are happening right now, because as soon as they're out in the workforce, they're going to be expected to know how to address those problems.
The wonderful thing about the SAGE project is that they have access to government leaders, they have access to city plans, they have the planner's time, so they have a lot more resources than they would have with just me.
My task is to fulfill whatever you guys put together to try to improve my community.
Having real-world professionals coming into the classroom setting, it makes your group work harder, and it makes you know that you're going to have somebody who's actually considering your thoughts and considering what you're going to come up with and push you a little bit deeper than you generally would go.
We've had a number of students who have had a lot of opportunities with the city that have come about because of their participation in this program, and others just have better job prospects overall just because of the experience. So they have wonderful things to write on their resume about this experience.
The SAGE project has definitely opened my eyes to the different opportunities that we as students could possibly have, and now I can see the array of possibilities that are waiting.
Okay, great. Over to you.
Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you so much. It's great to be able to join this panel and in general this session. There's so much good information. I'm so excited to hear all the rest of the presentations. And you know, I was just watching this video and it's like, how funny. It seems like a lifetime away from when people kind of were interacting in real life outdoors. It just, for those of us who are still like in lockdown, it feels like a long time, a lifetime away. So yeah, I mean, we're going to have a conversation, a quick conversation about different topics, and we very welcome all the questions. And I wanted to start by asking Jessica. This video kind of showcases the EPIC model that you guys put in place. So it'd be great if you could explain a little bit about how the EPIC model fits into local community objectives. How do you match those two needs?
Yeah, great. I'm happy to be here. Thanks for inviting us to be a part of this really interesting summit. So to address Daniel's question, and I think this is also our time to cue our first poll question that we have. So the SAGE project is, as Daniel mentioned, follows what we call the EPIC model, which is an international model of city-university partnership. It stands for Educational Partnerships for Innovation in Communities. And certainly city-university partnerships are not new, but what's unique about this particular type of partnership is that it's students are focusing on city-driven projects. So these are projects identified by our community partner as high priority, high need, as part of their general plan, as part of their budget. And in addition, those are matched with students in courses. So these are classes that already exist, that are already part of a professor's teaching load, and these are, we have maybe 30 classes in a given year, enrolling 500 or more students in a given year from disciplines across campus that are focusing on these projects. So those are some of the primary ways that the model differs. And again, this is a model that is international in that it is being replicated not only across the United States, but also in sub-Saharan Africa and Mexico and Brazil and Israel. And again, they're addressing high need, high priority projects that are identified by our community partner. So I'd like to take this opportunity to ask Daniel to talk a little bit about how a framework like this might, what the EPIC model might translate to the kind of work that's being done by you in the Galapagos, in your organization.
Yeah, no, thanks. I mean, first of all, congrats in implementing such a holistic and collaborative and multi-stakeholder model, which I think it's key for us at IOI. I mean, we're a small NGO working in Isabela, in Galapagos, and also in Cuba. And we're very aware that all our projects need to be co-developed and co-designed with real demands and needs from local communities and institutions. So our model of environmental sustainability pivots in honest and meaningful conversations about the local needs with all our stakeholders. And only then we can come up with clear objectives that we set as a group. And then we can start thinking about providing international education that ultimately will support the education, conservation, and social development of those communities. But I think it kind of, it mimics that there's like a multi-stakeholder approach, and also using those local necessities rather than, you know, what I see in a lot of other projects, that it's basically like there's a research or a institutional objective put above local needs. I mean, we believe in power, collaboration, cooperation, and most of us in this summit are. But as an international NGO, we need to ensure those meaningful dialogues happen between community members, between all stakeholders, before we can even start thinking about study abroad programs. So I think the EPIC model, which obviously we don't implement, but it kind of maximizes that experience, the knowledge, the passion of all those involved. And that's really what we do at IOI, using a different model, but the objectives and I guess the outcomes are very similar.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think what you're emphasizing is that need for a true collaboration so that everyone's voice is heard, right? Addressing a climate change and the related issues from a social standpoint and an economic standpoint and so on. I never saw the results of that poll. Is it possible? Oh, there they are. Okay, excellent. So it is, there are quite a few where people are working on projects where the local community sets a priority. That's great. Of course, there are different models of partnerships and collaboration in communities, but this is helpful just to see where people are coming from. Thank you for that. So Daniel, can you talk a little bit more specifically about how your work is addressing climate change in particular?
Yeah, for sure. I think obviously as part of the main topic of this summit. So all our projects and courses have very specific objectives. And as I said, those are set in collaboration with our local partners, community members. But I guess there are two overarching principles that lead all our present courses. First of all of them align with the United Nations SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, both in priorities but also in reporting back to those global objectives. So with this, what we try to have clear local driven objectives, but having a global impact and contribution. So that's one of them. The second one is that all our projects, we aim them to all be carbon neutral, and by 2022, we want to be carbon negative. So we know that's very ambitious strategy, but we're very proud. We put in a lot of hard work, and we feel it's our obligation to do that. So as part of the international education community, we all know the benefits that traveling to a different country, having a study abroad, having an international education experience has, but we cannot ignore the negatives. I guess by all of us being in this summit, we are aware of them. But we need to, other than be aware, like some of the examples that we've just seen in the last presentations, we have to do something about it. So in our case, we decided to tackle emissions holistically. So first of all, we started by measuring, which is what one of the previous presentation is. That's first thing, very simple. We have to measure. There are many different techniques and all aspects, from program-related emissions, flights with our participants, office-related, conference if those happen. Secondly, knowing those emissions and where they come from, we started doing analysis of how we can reduce those emissions at all levels. And then finally, we have a mitigation strategy. And very briefly, without going into a lot of details, we have two phases of that mitigation. The first one, which we feel is very, very important, it's assessing ongoing local projects that we have on the ground, mainly our Sustainable Agriculture project in Isabella. Just as a general background, Isabella, or Galapagos in general, relies heavily on imported food from mainland Ecuador, which has a huge emission component. So studies have shown that each kilogram of meat or vegetables imported to Galapagos results in approximately, in 50.73 grams of CO2. So in an 18-month pilot project that we did, the Sustainable Agriculture project, which basically produce meat and vegetables in the island versus importing it from mainland, we reduced the emission of 3.5 metric tons of CO2, which equates to completely offsetting the emissions of our operational base in Isabella. So that's the first stage. Then the second stage is we started a reforestation project with endemic species in Isabella that live side by side by the farms. So with the increase of the agriculture and the reforestation project, we think we can mitigate the majority of our remaining emissions, and if not, we will then go to some external projects. I have to just briefly mention that at this point, we are not talking about or counting the reduction in emissions that a student may have by being back home versus being in Galapagos or elsewhere. This has been shown in different studies that is actually already, just by being in a different location where your use just by being in that country is minimum, you already have a negative emissions. So if we were to take that into account, potentially our negative strategy, which we aim to get there by 2022, we would get there a bit faster. We know it's very ambitious, super ambitious strategy, but we really hope that this model is going to drive change in the whole field of international education. And at this point, I think it'd be very interesting to put the second question that we have for everyone, and that we're interested in knowing what the results so we can talk about those as well.
So cue the second polling. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, really inspiring work, Daniel.
Yeah. So what about in your case? What about in the EPIC model? How is the EPIC model being used to?
So we, so the EPIC model looks at, so we focus on quality of life, but of course the intersection between climate or environment generally and social justice and the economy is critical to be able to do that. And much like we've been describing. So some of the specific types of projects, it's a pretty even balance between that. So that's great. We have a nice mix here as far as the poll results are concerned. So I'll speak first about some of the projects that the SAGE project has done. We have helped cities with their climate action planning and also implementation. So we've looked at things like zero waste strategies for cities, focus on active transportation or complete streets. We've done air, water, and noise pollution studies. We have looked at, and then other EPIC programs have focused on sea level rise or storm surges. Our own program has even looked at disaster preparedness and response. And again, these are all in response to what the cities have asked of us. So these are, they know these are the things that they have to worry about, and they want to get everybody thinking about them. And one really great thing about getting students involved in these kinds of really complex and challenging issues that involve lots of different stakeholders and lots of different challenges is that whole problem solving thing that was mentioned in the video. So students know how complex stuff is. They are challenged, or critical thinking skills are enhanced. And so when they enter into the workforce, they're much more, first of all, knowledgeable about the issues that are facing our local communities and communities abroad as well. But also they come equipped with the skills to address more complex problems in a more creative way, we assume. So this is what SAGE has been doing, but also other EPIC programs across the world up to now. Yeah, and so I thought maybe I could ask Daniel if you could talk about how the stuff that you are doing in Galapagos could then be replicated or carried over, extrapolated elsewhere internationally.
Yeah, so and I would like to go back to some of the questions that have been asked right now in the Q&As, which I think may help kind of with this question. So there's a couple of questions about, you know, encouraging eating plant-based diets because obviously of the effect that farming has on CO2 emissions. So I'll bring it to our projects in Galapagos. So one thing that I mentioned initially is kind of being very aware of what the local needs, the local necessities are, and the local reality. I mean, we can, we a lot of times try to take our vision of reality in different locations. So one thing we did is, first of all, we assessed with our local partners what were the needs. In this case, there was an import of veggies, vegetables, meat from mainland. So that is something that we weren't going to stop. What we tried is we tried to revert that. So actually the process will happen in the island and in a more sustainable manner, by happening in the island in a small manner. So it's not like done in huge amounts. As we know, those are the ones that are the big contributors to CO2. Then everything is controlled more organically, more sustainably. Then, yeah, there is a big element of education, awareness to the students that come. By them seeing those experiences on the ground really kind of having an effect, then when you can go back home, you can start reassessing your own values, your own impact, and what are you going to be doing moving forward. So I think it is important to tackle it, but also with a very kind of local perspective in mind. And how can we extrapolate it? Well, the education portion, I think, is very important, that all programs, all projects, all courses that have these topics focus on educating students about being aware of how can you extrapolate those experiences abroad. And then the other one is, I think there was a couple presentations, I can't remember if it was the last one or the one before, about how there was a question, how do you use the mitigation, or how do you choose a mitigation project? There are so many out there. What I would say is one of the things that we can encourage, we can extrapolate from our experiences, that first of all, focus on local projects. So in that case, you know, there was a need for agriculture and meat production in the island, and that has a mitigation of emissions already. So let's focus on that one, which has a benefit on a global scale, but also has a benefit on the local communities. So that's something that I think it could be extrapolated to other. Then I guess the one very well is extrapolated from my ignore what's happening, and as international educators, we have an obligation to take on this issue, and I think that needs to be extrapolated to all projects. So with that in mind, I'll turn it to you, and then how do you think that the EPIC model can be implemented, or how has it been implemented?
Yeah, so the sort of international focus for the EPIC model, that hasn't, the model is really designed for a local focus, but it is flexible. It can be adopted and adapted in a variety of different ways to expand, and I defer to the experts here who work in international education directly to think about this. But some of the things that have happened, we're San Diego State University, so we're right on the border with Mexico. And so we have worked with the city of Tijuana, and our students have had international experiences through our partnership with the city of Tijuana. We also have had, every time we partner with a city, international students get involved either through the courses that they're taking or through community engagement activities as sort of extracurricular activities with our College of Extended Studies. And my colleague at San Diego State, Adrian Fusick, came up with a brilliant idea that I'm definitely going to pursue, and that is when we have cities partnering with us, we also try and reach out and collaborate with their sister cities. I think that would be a great way to get that international engagement, even when we're focusing on local projects. Is my sound coming through? Yes, okay. So Daniel, maybe you could, so I know we're wrapping up maybe you could talk about what you think our responsibility is with respect to climate change and international education. So this is our focus of this whole summit. So let me hear your reflections on that.
Yeah, I mean, we've gone for hours about this one, but I think as educators, we have an opportunity to really make huge impact on our students, as we very well know, especially when it comes to international education. We take students out of their normal day-to-day, out of the classroom situation. We put them in a situation, both physically but also mentally, where they're really able to, where we're able to help change their views of the world and their perspective. So I think in this topic that is just so important and that we cannot actually ignore, which is climate change, we have a huge responsibility. I think for many years, because obviously we love traveling, we see the benefits. We kind of, as a field, we've ignored the impact on climate change that we have. And I think it's now time, or it has been for many years, but it's time to really see some of the examples that many organizations are doing. Global experience before they were sharing, what we're doing with our negative carbon strategy, many other. So it's not just a few there. There's quite a few that are actually really doing amazing work and tackling holistically and just being very bold about it. But I think one of the most important things is that we need to include it in all programs, all courses, not only in the environmental related projects and courses, which is the easiest one, is the obvious one. There's everyone thinks about that alignment. I think we need to kind of start adding this concepts of sustainability and climate change to any course, any project that we do, and there are links around it, whether it's ethical consumption, whether it's traveling itself, it's just something that it happens in all of them. So I think the moment we start kind of not just linking it to very conservation, sustainability related projects, we'll be able to really kind of jump to a different level of impact on the international field. So what your final thoughts? On climate change.
Yeah, I agree with you absolutely. I think this is something that should be everyone's business, right? We should all be looking at our actions and making decisions and developing projects and through this lens of climate change, or what our impact is on the climate, or and better yet, how we might improve our situation with respect to the climate. So we can't, as you said, just rely on specific disciplines or specific sectors of our universities, let alone society, in addressing these challenges. This is something that we all need to be thinking about all the time. It is the great crisis of our time broadly. Of course, we have this other more acute one that we're experiencing right now, but this is a lens for all of us to be thinking through. So absolutely, I agree with your thoughts on that.
Okay. And do you want to take a stab at the? There was a question from Paul about digital certifications. Maybe you can quickly, and then I can give my thoughts. But if you want to kind of
sure.
Maybe
so how do we,
to answer that?
Yes. So how do we connect what happens on campus to helping students find employment opportunities during or after their studies? What are the role of digital certifications, including those focused on sustainability and helping bridge those gaps? So I'll just comment on the stuff that we've done. We've had, through our partnerships with local government, a number of our students have actually ended up getting jobs with our city partners simply by taking a class, and so they became much more knowledgeable about the local context, and then much more employable as a result of that. It didn't really necessarily matter their discipline, but by giving students these sort of high impact practices, by giving these students these opportunities to get to hone their critical thinking and problem solving skills, learn about the needs of their local communities, they're going to be far better prepared to enter the workforce, and far more knowledgeable of the local context. So that's certainly one way, and please feel free to comment as well, Daniel.
Yeah, I mean, if we're talking about international education programs, I think there needs to be those reflection sessions where we're able to help students kind of see the correlation between what's happening on the ground, wherever they may be, and those global topics, which then kind of you bring them down to local topics in their home location. So you kind of go from one local to global to local again. By doing that, and then kind of again through those conversations, those reflection sessions, kind of talking about the skills that people are learning, as you very well said, and those skills are transferable across all industries. So I think it's put a lot of emphasis on focusing on those what they call soft skills, which I really don't like that term at all, because they're very critical skills. I think that's really where we're going to be able to benefit the employability of the students. I definitely don't have hard data on it, but I mean, in my experience and in this last 15, 17 years of working in international education, I've seen so many cases of skills learned in completely opposite kind of arenas, how you can transfer them and how you can really kind of sell them from an employability perspective, and how really kind of has helped. So there's definitely, we all know that is just I think we need to also help students realize what they're learning other than the actual curriculum, but kind of what learning that is transferable to other fields.
Absolutely.
So I know we're running out a bit of time. We had until 5 but I really appreciate all the questions. I think both Jessica and I will be available at the LinkedIn platform, and very much welcome any further questions. And I'm very excited to learn this, and just to really to kick this conversation, really kind of help the field kind of make radical changes, which is what we need.
Well said. Yes, agreed. It's been a pleasure.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much to you both. That's really wonderful. Such an interesting discussion that you're right, we could have talked about forever. And I think that there's going to be a ton of opportunity in the LinkedIn group, as well as more events in the future. And so thank you to you both so much. Now we're going to have a panel on collaborative online international learning. We've heard a little bit about this. Professor DeWitt mentioned it earlier. And then we're going to tackle the discussion about virtual study abroad. So we're going to kick it off with a presentation from Professor Kiko Ikeda, who is a professor of international affairs at Kansai University in Japan. And following that, so Keiko will share what her institution has been doing. And then following that, we're going to have a discussion with a presentation from Jamie Andrew, who is the head of program development at Academic Experiences Abroad, and as well as Eric Lisi, who is the director of international relations at Black Hills State University. So we're going to kick it off with this video from Professor Ikeda, and then I will invite Jamie and Eric to join the discussion. So take it away, Keiko.
Hi, I'm Keiko Ikeda from Kansai University, Osaka, Japan. I am a vice director for my institution called IIGE, Institute for Innovative Global Education. Much appreciation for this chance to share with you about virtual exchange and COIL, Collaborative Online International Learning today. Virtual exchange and COIL are ways to create opportunities for international communication and collaboration with the pre-existing curriculum on campus using the digital tools available today. Let me provide you with a brief overview here. What is virtual exchange? A virtual exchange has an arc of engagement with a beginning, middle, and the end that is built and centered on the participants and the project goals. Virtual exchange should use a mix of synchronous, that means live, for example, tools like Zoom, Google Meet, and asynchronous, that means time delayed, for example, make use of recorded videos, social media posts, or emails. Those technologies that allow participants to interact and exchange beyond the surface level of connections. Virtual exchange refers to a different approach to online intercultural exchange projects in education today. Within virtual exchange family, there's a particular style of a virtual exchange called COIL, Collaborative Online International Learning. COIL is a team teaching effort by domestic and overseas courses offered in different institutions. It provides a project-based learning to the students in an international team setting. Because of the design of the practice, COIL enables teachers to bring collaborative learning to students. It also engages students more to the classroom learning from various cross-cultural encounters and communication. That students would go through it, this brings a high impact learning effect as learning outcome. Let me share with you some examples of COIL with visual images. Kansai University, where I belong, we had done 2 US-Japan COIL collaborations, for example, in the fall 2019. One is between James Madison University and Kansai University. At the JMU side, the course is called Making Sense of Beliefs and Values, a guided tour for global citizens. And at the Kansai University end, the course was called Field-Based Learning. There were 5 groups, each had a different theme, such as conflict resolution, human rights, global education, and sustainability. Their goal was to identify a wicked problem in their community, and within each group, they generated a slideshow or movie or presentation, whichever the media they prefer, that identified the problem and discussed opinions about it. The collaboration was 4 weeks, fairly short due to the gap of the academic calendar of both sides, but yet students had a lot to say about the interaction they had. For both Japan and US side, there was an important cross-cultural impact on the students, and their learning process has been influenced because of this experience. Virginia and Japan have a good 13 to 14-hour time difference. It is difficult to carry out live communication for the entire 4 weeks. How we solved it was to do one-time live connection using Zoom as a web conferencing tool to get students virtually meet for their first time, and then have them discuss with each other in the breakout sessions, such as an icebreaker group meeting. After that, students in each group communicated with each other on their own pace and meet the task goal, which is to produce a joint research project. COIL model of virtual exchange would usually go through steps to get them involved in a joint project. Various ice-breaking and further exercises such as video streaming share, opinion exchanges, etc. are done before they are guided into a collaborative project task. Task design for these activities are decided by the two instructors from both sides, coordinating with their original learning objectives for the course, and then generating a joint task design for COIL. Directions for international team project such as COIL must be clearly delivered, and participants must be respectful for cultural and institutional differences from both sides. Because of this nature, this particular pedagogy brings many positive learning effects both on teachers and the students. Let me now spend a few minutes to discuss the relevancy of COIL or virtual exchange for the audience of this conference. Recent survey done by QS may give us a hint. The pandemic crisis that the world is going through at the moment has produced a group who has given up on their study abroad opportunities, and a group who has postponed for a year for their chance. In the meantime then, students are back from their study abroad destinations, more or less stuck at their home ground. This is a universal context, certainly for US and Japan. The crisis has also created another still increasing group in the world, those who are interested in online education by overseas institutions. They stay put at their home ground, but they seek virtual mobility beyond their country. My point here is that international education, now more than ever, virtual channels of education are now on demand. As one of the very possible options, COIL or virtual exchange may come into the picture. When we integrate virtual options into international education, now we can go into various directions as to how to design one's international educational program. From a predominantly physical mobility course or predominantly virtual experience, we can create a combination of the two practices to get more impact. This being called blended mobility. Blended mobility is a deliberate combination of both physical and online mobility based on educational design. In this case, the advantage of short or long immersion are combined with an advantage of a flexible implementation of mobility, capturing both the benefits of physical and the virtual mobility. There are many merits to consider blended mobility. For the virtual exchange part of the program, the larger the number of students, you would expect a lower cost per head. So it would be easy on the students' affordability to join an international program. With the high rise of students interested in online education in the world now, it is most likely that blended online education enables universities to multiply international student numbers while keeping quality under control. Traditional study abroad usually involves only two universities, the home ground and target overseas destination. When virtual exchange is brought into the picture, the program can be organized among more than two universities in the multi-campus scheme. It can be flexibly organized by finding the right balance between synchronous or asynchronous modes of teaching and learning. Study abroad almost always involves air travel, arguably the most fuel-intensive way to move around. For example, a round trip from New York to London, about 7,000 miles, produces something on the order of 3 tons of CO2 per passenger. Yet, as an international educator, I would still argue that the value of a culture immersion experience is, however, very, very valuable. Study abroad experience would definitely bring the immersive impact. When a student studies at a location where, say, people live less carbon-intensive lifestyles or smart city design with the SDGs-bound mindset, such an immersed experience would most likely inspire him or her in her lifestyle changes upon return. For that kind of impact, student mobility is definitely indispensable. How to find a resolution for international educators with the concerns for the environment would bring me to think that the blended mobility is a way to go. If a physical mobility is definitely worthwhile, particularly for the long-term study abroad, for example, a year to a few years, study abroad is still a strong option. For very short-term programs, and we tend to have more and more nowadays, we can perhaps rethink whether it brings the desired impact by just having the physical mobility, or switch to blended mode. Ultimate goals of international education, to me at least, is to bring the students international high-impact learning and provide them with a transformative learning in their experience. Virtual exchange or COIL contributes to this goal. Possibly it leads us to see the new normal of international education through this time of crisis. Okay, so that's it for now. As just a snippet of virtual exchange in COIL world from me. I'll be more than happy to receive your feedback and questions through email, keikoikeda@kandaicourse.net. IIGE and Kansai University will be very happy to assist your first steps to get started. Thank you very much for watching, and take care, and please stay well, everybody.
Great, that's wonderful. So at this time, I just want to invite our next speakers to turn on the camera, and there they are.
Everybody, I'm going to share my screen. Bear with me. Thank you. Okay, so I'm Jamie Andrew, and I am the head of program development at AEA, and I'm presenting with Eric. Eric, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah. I'm Eric Lisey, Director of International Relations at Black Hills State University, which is out in western South Dakota in a town of about 10,000 people. So a little bit of initial context for what we'll talk about next.
Totally. So we're excited to talk more about virtual study abroad and expand on some of the things that were in Keiko's presentation, specifically thinking about how we can really increase access while reducing emissions. So I'm going to talk a little bit about AEA first and what we're doing, and then I'll turn it over to Eric and he can talk about what they're doing at BHSU. So AEA specializes in customized faculty-led programs. We actually have teams in 95 countries. As you can imagine, our last program ran this year, the very first week of March, and like, you know, pretty much everybody, we're really not sure when we're going to run our next program. We hope it'll be sooner rather than later, but it's a big question mark. So we spent a lot of time working on virtual experiences and programs. And the more we've worked on these, the more excited we've gotten about not just the short-term implications of what we can do in a COVID world, but even in the long term, once COVID has subsided and things get back to a new normal. I'll talk a little bit more about those in detail on the next slide, but they include things like virtual speakers, meetings, exchanges, and internships as well. A very important thing that I'd like to mention is that we are all about our university partnerships, and everything that we do is customized. So we don't have set programs that students sign up for. Everything we do, we work directly with university administrators and faculty to build together so that it really fits the university or college's students and programs and schools and all of that. And that's really pervasive in everything that we do. So you can see a handful of lovely humans from lots of different corners of the world. The main thing we've been working on in the last few months are virtual speakers. And there's a few reasons for this. This model, I think, is very exciting because it is very easy to integrate into pre-existing courses. We had a course that was supposed to go to Amsterdam in March, and it was a fantastic program, wonderful itinerary, and a ton of really specialized speakers and experts and practitioners. And it was such a disappointment to see all of those, hours and hours spent are making all those arrangements, and the faculty's curriculum just kind of feel like they were disappearing. So we actually were able to set up several virtual meetings via Zoom with the same individuals, with the students, with the teacher. They talked about the same things they would have talked about in person. Obviously, it would have been wonderful if the students had been there, but it was pretty amazing how easy it was to connect and for them to learn about what these people were doing and to have conversations about it. So we've since reached out to our network, and we have a huge network because we work with people in 95 different countries. So we have this gigantic network of people and access to them. We've had several requests for different types of programs. One example is a business administration program this summer. They're doing a comparative study of different business models and ways of doing business in different countries. And so we collected a handful of different practitioners, business people to talk, and they've selected 3 from the ones that we put together. And now the students will have a chance to sit and directly talk with these people in these different countries about what they do and how they do it. So that's been very exciting. I think this is something that, is very cost effective. I mean, if you have a group of students in a class, it can come out to like $20 a student, something like that. So it's something that I think the reach can really extend far, far beyond the students that go abroad historically every year. I'm getting ahead of myself. So the next thing we've talked about doing are organizational exchanges. And I think Keiko is really talking about this model in her presentation a lot with 2 universities working together. That's something that, we could also help do. We have lots of connections to different NGOs and even villages, communities, in addition to universities and colleges, for people who are looking to do like a longer term project with maybe a little bit of a deeper immersion. That's something that I think there's a lot of potential for really meaningful, thought and collaboration with our students here and overseas. And then we've also talked about recorded excursions, which could be either video or audio, sort of podcast style. And these would provide access to places that don't have streaming internet readily available. So maybe a rural farm or, a cooperative or things like that to provide access and insight into these things. All of these things continue to support the local communities, which is also very important to us. Especially at this time when, as you all know, just global tourism in general is very, very low. And all of these things require, of course, far less carbon than getting on a plane and going somewhere. So that's the overview of, sort of the things that we've been putting together. I'd love Eric to talk a little bit about what they're doing at BHSU and how this relates. So I'll hand it over to you, Eric.
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. So at Black Hills State University, we are a small regional public university, part of the system of South Dakota. So we have about 4,000 mostly regional students. I say that because we face challenges historically in increasing mobility of students, both our students going abroad, but also international students coming to us. And so in my role as Director of International Relations, I have been carrying conversations forward with our administration even before the coronavirus pandemic became a thing in March. These conversations started for us about 6 months prior to really be thinking of how can we be doing what we call study abroad a bit differently, keeping in mind the need to expand access and equity for all of our students. And so historically, Black Hills State has had the typical complement of programs. So exchange programs over a semester, a full year or summer, third-party provider programs, which we all know well, working with AEA to develop and deliver faculty-led programs on a short-term basis. So more of the standard traditional set of experiences that we're used to. Where we are now, particularly with COVID, I feel like this is both a blessing and a curse. I think that it has raised fundamental questions for the higher ed institution about basically the whole enterprise of international education. And I think it intersects directly with climate change and issues around climate, and also changing student behaviors and preferences. So we have been carrying conversations again about how we can think about this differently. And just to throw some examples out, the domestic service learning model has become something of great interest to Black Hills State. We have always done service learning, but it had taken a bit of a backseat to more of the faculty-led program, short-term program model. And reviving that service learning, more domestic-based, but yet still cross-cultural, intercultural type experience where students are being exposed to global social problems in our own backyard, and then bringing that back to campus in a more applied manner has been a conversation that we've been having. And I will just say, for good of the order, Jamie, that Jamie and I have been having that conversation as well. This is where our collaboration comes into play. So that's one potential model that we're exploring to address all of these complex issues that are brought forth through climate change, global pandemics, and then again, more on a higher level, I think the access issue around how much it costs, and also changing student behaviors with Gen Z students. That's one model. A second model, and this may actually address a question that's been posed in the Q&As by Amira, sorry if I didn't pronounce that right, is intersecting this with international student recruitment and enrollment, as well as services. So we have an exchange partner in a European country who's a very deep and long-lasting partner for BH. We spend a fair amount of time together. We have by chance similar international enrollment and recruitment goals. And so we have been carrying conversations about essentially offering a partial curriculum from BH to their international students at their university, and combining that with potentially short-term trips abroad, maybe 3 weeks over summer in either direction, to give students that on-campus experience as part of their degree program, but not as a full degree program, if that makes sense. So really delivering a hybrid model where students are earning credit towards a dual degree or a joint degree, and then having an option to supplement that with time at either university. So our students going there, or their students coming to us. So in that way, we're trying to think of ways that we can overlap our existing exchange partnerships with our international enrollment goals, as well as our study abroad or outgoing mobility goals. Again, that's another model that we're discussing and looking at and trying to figure out how feasible and viable that would be. Those would be the two main conversations that we've been having, but of course, much of this is couched against a very clear sense for us, given again our population and where we're located, that we need to make access more equitable for all students, and as well as keeping things like climate impact top of mind as we rethink how we can still get the same kind of pedagogical and developmental outcomes for students, but doing it in a bit of a different way. I will also just end this point by saying that another reason that this has come up at Black Hills State is that we have a major sustainability effort at our institution to be carbon neutral by 2050, and we're over 60% of the way there. All of our major buildings are powered through solar power. We have a windmill on campus. So there's a lot of other sustainability things that are a part of our identity, and fitting international education into that sustainable identity is where this conversation, I think, really dovetails, like I said, with all of those other cross-cutting issues. So while we don't have any concrete outcomes to speak of at this point, I guess it remains to be determined. And we, again, will continue working with Jamie and our folks and our friends at AEA to try and advance some of these new models and figure out really how to have the biggest impact while providing the most access.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jamie and Eric. We're really grateful for your time and your expertise and very inspiring work that you're doing. We're actually going to have to kind of wrap and move to our leadership panel now because we are running a little bit behind schedule, and appreciate everyone's flexibility on that point. So with that said, it's a thrill to have welcomed Jamie and Eric, and an equal thrill to now introduce our leadership panel, which will be chaired by Karin Fischer, who kind of needs no introduction, but Karin is an higher education, international education journalist extraordinaire with the Chronicle of Higher Education and with Latitudes, her own newsletter. We have Robin Shields, who we kindly heard from earlier in the session on video, and now he's here for reals, and so he'll be on the panel, as well as Daniel Obst, President and CEO of AFS, which has really taken a leadership role in addressing carbon emissions in a big, bold way. And last but not least, Janet Ilieva of Education Insight in the UK. Janet is, I think it's safe to say, a world expert in transnational education, doing things sort of outside the box, I guess we could say. So without any further ado, I'm really pleased to turn it over to Karin. And just as a housekeeping note, we are going to keep this session to approximately 35 to 40 minutes, even though that means we'll run over time a little bit because we think people would want that. So without ado, turn it over to Karin and team.
Hi to everyone. I'm so glad to be here with you all today. You know, as Eddie said, we really hope to have kind of a diverse sort of selection of viewpoints and experiences here. We have people who are practitioners. We have some real academic experts in the field, and I like to think of myself as an interested observer and chronicler of these things. The way this is going to work is we're going to give some sort of lightning keynotes. So each of our three panelists is going to talk for about 5 minutes, and then we really want to have a conversation. I think we're interested in thinking about both sustainability and environmental impact in international education in the time of COVID, but also we're going to try, as much as that's possible these days, to think beyond the immediate and talk about the long term. And as always, the Q&A is open, and I'll be trying to keep one eye on it. And so please, if there are things that you hope we all can address, I hope you put some questions in there. So as Eddie said, we are short on time. I don't want to waste time with preamble. So why don't I turn it over first to Robin for his remarks.
Great. Okay. Well, thanks. It's so nice to be speaking with everyone, and thanks, Karin, for chairing this session. So I'll just briefly introduce myself and share some thoughts on CANI so far. Most of my work has been kind of highlighting the problem of climate change in international higher education, kind of maybe pointing out the elephant in the room, as Anne said, and it's often an uncomfortable subject because there's so much that's good about international higher education. People are uncomfortable to talk about the problems of climate change and that we don't really have an answer here. But what I've really liked about CANI is I think there's such a sense of the future and beyond the problems, kind of what are the solutions. So I've enjoyed hearing what people have said today. I think that the problem of climate change and the future, especially now with the coronavirus crisis, creates a lot of uncertainty. As Anne's presentation said, there's anxiety about climate change among many young people. I've heard about 25% of young people reported in a survey having lost sleep over anxiety from climate change. So the future is very uncertain, but with that, it also means that it's open and we can change it and we can shape it. And so that's why an event like CANI is so uncertain. And I think what I've learned recently is that no matter how much we think we know the future, it's always uncertain, and it never turns out how we expect it will. So I never would have guessed, I don't know about you all, but even in February, I was thinking this coronavirus thing will blow over and I'll be fine. I mean, I'm relatively lucky, but you know, it's changed the world quite significantly. So the future doesn't turn out as we think it would. And also, as William Gibson, who's kind of a sci-fi author, has said, the future is already here, it's just unevenly distributed. So a lot of what's going to be the future of international higher education is happening in places like Kenny. So there's a lot to be excited about, I suppose. And one final quote on the future comes from a movie that shaped my thinking about the future when I was young, Back to the Future, the trilogy. And the future was always seen as kind of optimism, you know, things would be better. And Doc Brown, one of the main characters, ends the whole trilogy by saying, your future is whatever you make of it, so make it a good one. So Kenny's a great place to kind of make the future of international higher education a good one.
Thanks, Robin. Perhaps now I can turn to Janet.
Thank you. Thank you, Karin. And thank you, Eddie, for the kind introductions. I feel I've had a massive upgrade there in Eddie's very kind introduction. I'm very honored to join this panel and very grateful for the opportunity to contribute to such an important conversation. And if I can pick up on one of Robin's points about Kenny is the future, and I would also argue transnational education is the future in a very strong way, and I shall articulate this point a little bit better. But perhaps just take a step back and define what I mean by transnational education. Simplistically, this is the provision of higher education outside of the home country of the institution. And examples include online, distance learning, the international branch campuses, for example. So about 60% of the UK's international students are actually based in their home country or in their home region. This equates to about 700,000 international students. As such, the reliance on physical mobility is significantly lower compared to traditional forms of international education, for example. And I guess another argument that makes TNE resonate very strongly with me is if we look at the UNESCO data, the globally mobile students, they only represent about 2% of the world's higher education students. Transnational education actually equips institutions with the means to reach significantly larger proportions of students beyond this 2% of globally mobile students. I also think that there is a strong sustainability agenda there, and this is very much in relation to access. And by access, I've got kind of two interpretations of access. Access to an international degree, but in a much more cost-effective way, but also access to higher education in general. Traditionally, transnational education has evolved to absorb unmet demand for local higher education. And whilst the traditional forms of transnational education were like physical outposts of campuses overseas, I guess over the past couple of decades, we're seeing increasingly collaborative forms of transnational education provision where so more than one institution, 2 or 3 are coming together to collectively develop a course which is locally relevant. So in addition to access to local students, or in addition to bringing education where the students are, there is also quite a significant component of capacity development with local staff. Why am I saying, or why am I arguing that the future looks very much like acceleration of transnational education? And I think COVID has triggered something that, I mean, apart from the negatives and all the challenges that universities are grappling with, COVID has actually pushed them to think in a different way, to engage with students in a different way. Online learning has normalized online tuition, for example. Whilst I'm not saying that online learning will be a substitute for on-campus face-to-face teaching, I think we're likely to see blended forms, and there will be quite a huge variations in terms between blended components of learning and still face-to-face on-campus experiences. But also, as we have this conversation now, the world is very slowly sliding into a global recession, which is quite scary, and which the IMF compares to the Great Depression of the 1930s. So while domestic demand for higher education is counter-cyclical because of weaker labor prospects for students, as such, we expect to see much greater demand for domestic higher education. It's the opposite with regard to international student demand, because the purchase power of the middle classes will be significantly reduced. And as such, students are likely to seek cheaper, more cost-effective alternatives that are closer to home, and possibly either in their home country or in their home region. So this is actually building on a trend that I've been observing over the past 20 years. Again, if I can just refer to the very helpful data that the UNESCO Institute of Statistics is publishing, international global mobility towards North America and Western Europe was 64%. So 64% of the globally mobile students went to study to North America and Western Europe in 1998. At the moment, it's just over half. So over the space of 18, 19 years, there has been about 12% decline in mobility towards the traditional study destinations. But other regions are enjoying increasing appeal, such as East Asia, such as Central and Eastern Europe, such as Middle East and North Africa, particularly countries in the Gulf states. So I think what basically COVID is indirectly impacting is triggering much greater student flows towards regions where the students are actually coming from. And talking about regional mobility, I see this being to a degree accelerated by strong transnational education provision. And the way that higher education institutions will maintain their engagement with these audiences that most likely won't be able to afford into full international degree would be by reaching out to them, by bringing their offering to those particular regions and working collaboratively with countries in the region, particularly institutions and are like-minded or not that like-minded, but universities that think like them, and universities that they can actually build relationships and partnerships with. And I shall end on that point and possibly pick up some of the other issues in the discussion later on. Thank you.
Thanks, Janet. Daniel?
Great. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for including me and AFS in this discussion. Congratulations to the organizers. I really have to say this is such an important event, and the time for action is now. And just like Robin said, to me, the most important piece in this is it's our job to shape the future we want to see. So, and I think that also relates a lot to how we react to whatever COVID is doing to us as international education community members. I want to give a brief introduction and talk really about the reset piece in the title of this, because AFS has pressed the reset button a couple times in our history. So now most of you probably know AFS for our high school exchange programs. We exchange about 12,000 participants every year around the world. We have 60 AFS national organizations. We're a volunteer-driven organization with 50,000 volunteers around the world. But the origin of AFS was in World War I, and we were the American Field Service then that had volunteer ambulance drivers who went to Europe to transport wounded civilians and soldiers. And so the real values that were part of the organization were always around volunteerism, civil courage, and serving where it was needed. And so after the Second World War, that was kind of the first big pivot of AFS. And the question really was, what is needed to create a more peaceful world? And so at AFS back then, 75 years ago, the answer was, we need more mutual understandings. We need to break down the barriers of fear and hate, and therefore exchange programs were started. Now, 75 years later, the world looks quite different and a lot has changed. It's teenagers who started a huge movement to champion climate action, but they're protesting not only for climate action, but they're also protesting for a more just and peaceful world. But to me, the interesting piece is that peace no longer means only the absence of war, but it also means a more fair and sustainable world. And so for us, the question was, what is needed now at AFS and in the world, and how do we respond to it? So a couple of years ago, we hit the reset button again and adopted a new strategy, which now in hindsight was quite prescient. And our main goal really was to develop more responsible citizens through intercultural learning to take action in their community and around the world. So we call them active global citizens. And so how we are doing this right now is really in two levels. We're taking a dual approach to transitioning our work to a more sustainable future, both at the macro and the micro level. At the macro level, essentially, it's all about becoming more sustainable as an organization. So it's about our processes and procedures. As Eddie mentioned earlier, we made a big pledge last year to offset all our travel emissions from our flagship exchange programs as standard practice. These are 12,000 exchange participants every year, so it's quite a lot. It's of course only one part in a multi-step process to become more carbon neutral as an organization. We've started piloting new ways of travel. So can we have more train travel instead of plane travel in Europe? It's a little bit more complicated when you're dealing with minors because you have duty of care issues and so on, but we're actively working on those issues. One of our alums is the CEO of South Pole, which is an amazing carbon financing organization. So we're now talking with them exactly how we can offset our carbon emissions and really also engage our students and volunteers in actually beyond just like ticking the box, but really seeing how climate change affects real life activities on the ground and really building that into the programs that we have. And that is kind of the second piece of our approach, is really about the content. So how do we best prepare active global citizens so they become change makers in the world? And so this is, for me, also the second part of this panel discussion, and the topic is about leadership. So how do we create the next generation of leaders who take action in their community? And just a couple examples here, we are partnering now with the University of Pennsylvania Center for Social Impact Strategy on creating a new curriculum for all our exchange participants on social impact and how you become a social entrepreneur. So really providing them with the tools to do that. We're adding new programs that are very dedicated on climate change and sustainable issues. We have a new series of workshops for schools that are locally offered called Effect Plus. We've reached almost 10,000 participants in 200 schools in 20 countries around the world, all focused on sustainable development goals and so on. So for us, really, our belief is that as educational organizations, as mission-driven organizations, we can't sit on the sidelines of this conversations. And so if we are organizations that are made up of global citizens and that are intending to build global citizens, we must model our own values. So this is really where our pledge comes in and where we see our future as an organization.
I wonder if I could begin actually right where Daniel left off, which is talking about empowering individuals. I think quite often within international education, the conversations can tend to default to the higher level, to the university, to the organization, to higher ed broadly. And I wonder, and maybe I can start with you, Daniel, since you started to touch on this, but what are some ways that we can empower individuals, so students, but also people within the international community who are committed to and who care about these issues. How can we help them be empowered and have an effect on these things?
Yeah, it's a really important issue. And I feel so often in this discussion, it is largely about ticking the box, right? Doing the right thing as an organization, but really not taking the next level. From our perspective, pretty much everything is around local leadership, right? Like, how do we really prepare people who are responsible citizens in their own local communities? And so that means having the right tools. But from the AFS perspective, what is super important to us, it's core to our mission, is the intercultural learning. So you're not going to solve any global challenges or deal with any interpersonal or intercultural issues without the skills and tools around intercultural learning. And that goes not just for global engagements, but also for local engagement. So for us, it is always about the content knowledge and the experiential piece around engagement with others, but it's also the very intentional intercultural learning that is necessary if you really want to empower future leaders. So that's core to AFS.
And Robin, I wonder if I can ask you a similar question about agency and kind of helping people seed it and find it.
Yeah, I think it's often hard for people who are in large institutions and they have specific goals that are set for them and their role, and they're wondering, what can I do about climate change? It's a difficult situation. I think one thing that we can all do is just start to talk amongst ourselves in forums such as this. So being the one who raises the issue, is there a way that we can consider climate change in whatever new program we're starting? You know, can we, if we're bringing people from abroad, can we be sure that we're talking about climate change while they're here, so that hopefully over the long term, this contributes to part of the solution? I think we need, as a field, we need success stories of new innovative programs in internationalization. So now is the time for students who are traveling by rail in Europe to post something on TikTok that shows how much fun it was when they were on the train, rather than, you know, crammed in an airport somewhere. So that's something we can all do, is just through social media, highlight what we're doing. And I suppose for many of us over the next few years, we have a new opportunity to show what's possible in our roles. We're not going to have the same expectations, and we're not going to run programs the same way as we have in the past. So the question will be, do we revert back after this period to what we were doing before? Or maybe in this period, we've shown something else is possible, and we can continue that as we move forward.
You know, that's a really great point, Robin, because one thing I've been thinking about is that it really felt like this was a moment in which this conversation about sustainability and international education was really beginning to blossom and flower. And I have been wondering myself about where do we go from here? Is this going to be something where suddenly all we can talk about is coronavirus and these conversations and focus on climate action sort of take a back seat? Or does this somehow make us think, which is I think perhaps a little bit what you're suggesting, of ways to be innovative, and it ends up spurring that? And I wonder if I can just kind of draw you out a little bit more on that.
Yeah, I think you're right, that the future's in the balance, in a sense, is after the next few years, do we say, well, that was difficult, now let's go back to what we were doing before? And there'll be a lot of pressures to do that. There'll be financial pressures to bring in new revenue streams from universities that have had a difficult time. But there's also the possibility for real change. And so it's very much up to us as to which of those two things happens, to go back to the Doc Brown quote, I guess, being the future being what you make of it. Innovation is key here, definitely. And we've heard some really great stories today of people running exchanges in new ways. And probably not just trying to virtualize existing exchange opportunities, but maybe imagine something which is altogether new. A new way of doing internationalization, I think, is probably going to be the most convincing way to grow in this time.
And Janet, I'd be curious about your thoughts. You raised the issue of transnational education in your remarks, and I wonder if you as well see this moment as a way to kind of help seed new approaches, or if you worry we're just going to get focused on the pandemic and not think about these kind of underlying structural issues within higher education.
Yes, I do think that the pandemic has triggered some innovative ways to do things, different ways of doing things. And transnational education has provided the tools to do things differently. And it is no surprise that institutions that were best prepared to switch to online were the ones with strong online provision, because they had the infrastructure to switch to such provision, although it required massive effort. This is not to say it was easier for them, it was just as hard, but they could easily deploy infrastructure to utilize by teaching in a different way. But also having the connections in countries and to engage with students in a different way. I guess I gave them this additional flexibility to continue with their teaching. I'm hearing examples, for example, the University of Coventry is considering whether some of the students can possibly start the course in their home country with a local education partner. And then when the health situation improves, they can switch to the course in the UK. Obviously, this is not a firm decision. It's just one of the possible scenarios that universities are talking about. But also going ahead with online lectures and having face-to-face tutorials is another possibility that teaching can take place. In the space of transnational education, I guess there are some quite a few examples. The one that comes to mind is virtual exam boards. So instead of the academics traveling to the country where the education provision is happening, they can actually facilitate it in a virtual way, which is still quite labor intensive in a way, but it has a significant lower carbon footprint. And even without a shadow of a doubt, I don't think that when the pandemic is over, universities are going to switch back to flying to facilitate or to participate in exam boards or have their quality assurance meetings in the country of education provision. So I think that these new practices are quite likely to stay. They're much greener, they're much more environmental. And I guess one of the developments that I would really love to see is when students choose the modules they have to do, and each module has credits attached to it, why not each module have carbon footprint attached to it, just as means to inform the student about the total impact. It's not just on their career, but on the environment as well.
I think I've been thinking about this question. I just saw it pop up in the Q&A feed, and I wonder if I can pose this to you, Janet. I mean, I think for so long, mobility, particularly of students, has been seen as kind of almost the central tenet, is almost synonymous with international education. And I wonder if there are ways, you know, when people in this field have spent, you know, generations quite literally talking about the value of gaining cultural exchange and understanding through crossing borders, what are some ways to reframe the conversation so that it's seen as being of, you know, transnational education or virtual exchange are seen as being you know, having equal benefits?
Yes, I guess it's embracing change, and I'm going to use a quote that from Jane Knight that she used in an interview I had with her about 3 years ago, and it is: international higher education is proactive for change. It's it's proactive to opportunity. It's reactive to change, but proactive to opportunities. And I think that if we embrace international higher education in all its facets, in all its shapes, because it's not, student mobility is the most visible one, is the one that we can measure, it's most tangible. We see the students on campus. But in addition to that, we have the mobility of education programs, we have mobility of institutions, mobility of research. Collaborations are happening across borders anyway, and these are all connections there that complement an international experience or a student experience. I quite liked the reference made earlier by Daniel and Robin about, we're talking about intercultural competencies. And I guess this global fluency is another expression I've come across. The Vice Chancellor of the UK's University of Nottingham used that expression a short while ago, and I really liked it because it's this global fluency that people develop irrespective where they are. And I think student mobility will continue to be there, but it will look differently. Maybe students will no longer travel for 4 years and they'll be flying back and from to the country they come from in the space of 4 or 5 years. Their mobility options may be a bit shorter. There may be a bit fewer flights involved in that. I'm not saying that it will completely disappear. It will be there, but it will change its shape.
Daniel, maybe I can turn back to you and ask you much the same question. I mean, I know you obviously have a crystal ball in the other room. I mean, what are you seeing? How do you think mobility and international education might be different on the other side of these things?
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. So from my perspective, I think it's always most important to start with the mission of your organization, whatever it may be, right? And I feel like at crisis points or important pivot points to really ask, are there new ways, better ways to meet our mission? And I think what we're kind of using as our internal motto is build back better, right? Because to a certain extent, there are things that will be really impacted. Our work won't be exactly the same. I would very much miss a world in which there's no real exchange, where you meet a person face to face in a different country and you experience that. So from my perspective, I would never want to see that go away, but it always was an issue with access. You know, who has access to these kind of experiences? And I feel if this is now forcing everyone to think about how else can we provide really meaningful intercultural, international engagement that may not be part of travel, but that is more than just a cooking class online in a different country, you know, I think that would be a huge contribution to the field. And I see a lot of these initiatives starting to take shape because you just have to deliver real educational content now in different ways. And so I think that's really positive.
Do you, Robin, see similar silver linings?
Yeah, I would echo.
Building back better, yeah.
Yeah, I would echo a lot of what's been said. I agree with the question, and that physical mobility is kind of the gold standard in the field, and things like the junior year abroad in the US are kind of a cultural institution, and it's going to be really hard to change that. So probably the key is to look for new forms of international education that don't have kind of a deficit model. So they're not trying to do something equivalent to the physical mobility just virtually, but rather are doing something completely different. We don't want kind of low carbon, to use an analogy, we don't want low carbon international education to be like tofurkey is to a plant-based diet. Like it doesn't taste very good. It's just trying to mimic the real thing, if you like. We want it to be something that really shows off the flavors that are possible, I suppose. And so it might mean students doing collaborative projects together at the same time. If we had groups of students now perhaps promoting behavior around social distancing in their communities simultaneously and showing what they're doing, that wouldn't really be possible through physical mobility, as far as I know. And so there are things that we can do virtually that we can't do physically, and that's probably where we want to focus.
Can I add one more thing, Karin, if I may? One thing that we've seen, so we had to repatriate about 6,000 or 7,000 students, which was a logistical challenge in itself. But what we did very quickly, we have this global competence certificate that was actually developed for higher education students. Within 2 weeks, we reprogrammed it so it was for high school participants, and that it was basically an off-boarding process for the vaguely traumatic experience of having to cut your program short to return home. So we have 6,000 kids from 60 countries around the world enrolled in this. And to me, the most exciting piece there is almost all exchanges are bilateral in nature. And this is like, we have a global community of people talking synchronously and asynchronously about this global experience that they all had that was shared. And to me, there's huge opportunity in figuring out how we can have more of these truly global conversations rather than just the bilateral ones.
I mean, I think that's a really great point, because I do think sometimes, in the same way that we use mobility as being synonymous with intercultural competency, we do also, think of when we talk about international, we really do mean bilateral. And so I wonder, Janet, if, to get your thoughts about this silver linings piece of this. I liked your idea about global fluency, and I wonder, are there ways in which you think that can be, pushed in a different way that is robust and meaningful for students?
Yes, I think the silver lining there is green. And by saying that, I do mean that the way that higher education is going to go ahead is in a much more collaborative way. The engagement between institutions will become even stronger. There will be quite significant shifts in the making in terms of students and student flows, what they demand, how can we respond to global challenges. And the way to actually address it is through partnerships. There has been mention a few times of bilateral, but I guess the way forward is multilateral. But we have more than 2 institutions from more than 2 regions coming together to provide quite a unique experience to their learners, whether it's through virtual mobility or physical mobility, with students having greater control over the study modules that they're doing. But I guess the way I want to dream about higher education is very much student-centered, around their wants, about their circumstances, about their environment, and actually reaching a little bit broader to that is the community of the student that the student comes from, and being able to cater to all these idiosyncrasies that different communities across the globe have and bring, because it's actually enriching the conversation that we are having now. And the whole notion about that it's no longer the students going to university, is the universities reaching out to the students and bringing education to wherever they are, as such physical proximity. It's much less relevant now, and well, it will become even less relevant in future. So if I could just bring kind of my talk back to where we started. Yes, I do see the silver lining being very much on the sustainability front, collaborations and partnerships.
We've got just a few minutes left now, unfortunately, but I do want to, I'm always kind of guilty as a reporter of monopolizing the questions. And so I wanted to pull another one that I've noticed in the Q&A queue, which is, and I think that this commenter makes a point, which is probably true, which is often people who believe in something, whether it's in the importance of sustainability or the value of global education, often we tend to talk to the converted. And so this person was asking, how can we talk to the folks who don't necessarily buy in to these things? And I think that could be both within your institutions, within higher education, but also how do we talk to people within the general public about these things? Jen, I see you nodding your head. You have some thoughts first?
I think it's basically bringing back the students with their environment, and we can do that in a much better way, much more impactful way, by basically reaching out where the students are, because it is a way to engage with the local context, and the best way to do that is through local partners that know the local cultural context, the local economic context. They know the environment better. And the promotion of true collaboration is likely to happen in equal partnerships, where we don't have a dominant institution or dominant partners, but it's truly mutual, it's truly collaborative. And I do believe that only in this way, where the benefits and the participation is truly mutual, we can have this much wider impact on communities and societies that are virtually beyond our reach. And if I can just add another dimension to that conversation, I don't think I've mentioned enough about, if at all, about internationalization at home agenda. And I do things through the virtual means and through transnational education. There is internationalization at home, kind of on several campuses. It's in the partner institution to a degree, because there are students that are doing an international degree and are engaged with a collaborative program, but equally impact on the domestic institution that is engaged in these partnerships, in these collaborations, because this teaching doesn't happen in its own. There is a whole student body behind it in the home country. So I think a strong component there, it cannot happen in isolation from the internationalization at home agenda.
Well, I just wanted to ask then one big picture, last final question, and to invite each of you to weigh in. I feel like today, you know, May 2020, when we talk about the future, it's whenever there's a vaccine and we can all start to get back to what was normal beforehand. And I wonder if I can ask you to cast your eyes a little bit more forward than that, and to tell me sort of what you're thinking might happen in terms of international education and specifically about sustainability within international education. What do you see happening, you know, if we were to regroup a decade from now and have this conversation? What will we be talking about then?
I could jump in. I could start off. Yeah. I mean, I think I would like to be surprised, actually. So I would like to see something in 10 years from now that we can't even imagine today. I hope it would be lower carbon. I hope it would go beyond how we consider virtual education today or transnational education, and maybe approach things entirely differently. So that's very vague. But I think sometimes the best outcomes are the ones that you can't even imagine today. But just to wrap up, I think the people in attendance today and some of the videos we've seen from students are exactly the right type of people who will come up with these ideas that today are just kind of simmering underneath the surface.
If I can just echo what Robin said there, is that the real drivers of change will be the students. They will demand different ways of tuition, more environment-friendly types of education provision, and universities would have to face that, have to respond. I mean, interestingly, at the moment, a lot of the responses are either driven by cost efficiency, by making education tuition much kind of more cost effective, trying to make it sustainable, but from financial sustainability point of view. Whereas the environment, I think, is equally important. So decisions have to kind of bear both in mind, both components. It's the environmental impact, but also the financial impact. And students will demand the latter. So I think that we'll see increasing pressure on universities to respond to that. Students have an amazing civic engagement. So I don't think they will let institutions not address the issue. And my other point is about this autumn and in 10 years. I think that a significant advantage in the current situation would be on side of institutions that have a very clear vision of what the 10 years look for them. And their autumn response has to be part of that vision, has to be a step in the direction that brings them closer on what is to come in 10 years. Otherwise, it's a step back.
And for me, I love the surprise. I would love to be surprised too. I hope we are surprised that we're not in a conversation of whether it's national or global or local or global, that we are in a world where people really truly see our interdependence and where we listen with empathy and where we have a much better way of talking across difference. And I feel if this is what this crisis, but also the need for more engagement is pushing, I think that would be a better world.
Well, thanks to all three of you, and thanks for those of you who stuck with us and you know, got to raise some really great points. I do think, you know, just to echo all three of you, I mean, there is some ways in which a crisis does kind of concentrate attention and you know, not to be cliched, but can lead to innovation. And I think it will be really revealing to see kind of how some of the conversations that I do hear happening within institutions and organizations about, you know, thinking, taking this time to think in a far-reaching way, if they can bear fruit. So with that, let me turn it over to our organizers, and they'll be wrapping it up. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, thank you so much, everyone. That was amazing. I know we're running a little bit behind schedule, and you know, we got our panel started early and late, but that meant that we were actually moving a student video to the end, and it feels fitting to end to hear the voice of students. So we had previously heard from students from SDSU who were domestic students studying abroad. So we do have some perspective of international students studying, in this case, in Canada. So we're super keen to hear from them.
Hi everyone, my name is Kim Sang-ho and I'm from Denmark. I'm an international student studying international relations and anthropology at the University of British Columbia. Climate change is important to me because I think that we as humans are the cause of it, and because of that, we're the only ones who can bring it to an end. From the past few weeks of social distancing and staying at home, there's been a clear positive impact on our environment and planet. My university can promote sustainability efforts by implementing more virtual events such as fairs, conferences, and school tours from a student's perspective. This would limit international travel, reduce carbon footprints, and also increase our global connection. Another thing that UBC Housing can do is provide customizable waste bins so students are more obliged to learn about how to appropriately separate household waste. Climate change is such an important issue, and it is our responsibility to take care of our planet, not only for ourselves, but for our future generations. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Mariam Yaqut. I'm an international student from United Arab Emirates, studying business at Simon Fraser University in Canada. Climate change matters to me because I believe that our actions have threatened our ecosystem, environment, and community, and will impact the future of our planet, causing political, economic, and social conflicts. However, we can change that. We can move towards sustainable solutions, adopt renewable resources, encourage further dialogue on climate action, and this can create positive impacts on climate change. One action that I would like my university to take with regards to climate change, particularly in the field of travel, would be for SFU to start a bike rental or bike sharing campaign on campus so that more university goers are encouraged to take greener transport and that carbon and vehicle transmissions or emissions on campus can be reduced. Thank you.
So thank you so much to our students. We received so many submissions for students, and we just didn't have the ability to share them all. So please know that we will be sharing them over time, over on our socials, on our network, through the CANI network. You will also have the ability to see both the recording for this session and the recording for yesterday's session, which was also still on the 21st because time zones are weird. So thank you so much. I just wanted to take one quick second to, take a moment to appreciate everyone that contributed to doing this. A big thank you to our sponsors. Again, you can see them here. They really span the globe. And so we're super, super grateful. This was also a massive undertaking, so a huge thank you to all of our panelists, and to, that last leadership panel was nice. I was just sitting back in awe. So I'm just the conversation that happens and the conversation that will happen from here. So you are certainly not done hearing from Kenny. We will continue to be in touch, and we will continue the conversation. I've seen some really incredible discussions on Twitter. So if you are there, go check out that hashtag Canny Summit 2020. There's a lot of amazing content. So thank you for contributing to our Q&As. We will take a lot of that content and also share it to continue that discussion. But I also wanted to take a quick second here to recognize our team. So this is them who, Petulia and Ailsa are founders, and then the rest of the sort of summit team. I will ask everyone who is on here to turn on their cameras, wave goodbye to all of our guests. And with that, here we are. So thank you so much. We are very grateful to everyone, and wishing you all a wonderful day. And we look forward to connecting you after this.